Families and Communities. Welcome everyone this morning. This hearing is docket number 0824, a hearing regarding the childcare crisis in Boston. To view this hearing, please visit www.boston.gov and go to the link for, oh Lord, my telephone, turn this thing off. Sorry about that. And throw it away. I thought I had it muted. Yes, City of Boston, Boston-City-Council-TV. Please note that the Ionella Chamber and all other City Council facilities are closed until further notice to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Written testimony may be sent to the committee or staff emails and will be made a part of the record and available to all councillors. Members of the public are invited to attend and testify via Zoom meeting. Please email ron.cobb@boston.gov for a Zoom link and a comprehensive list of ways to view and participate in the hearing will be posted online. I would also like to thank Councillors Wu and Councillor Campbell for joining me in co-sponsoring this very important hearing on an issue that impacts thousands of Boston families. I also want to thank all the panelists and all those folks who have sent video or written testimony today. Without further ado, I will just make some brief opening statements and then I'll call on my co-sponsors to make some opening statements as well. I just want to let everyone know that we are joined today by Councillor Ed Flynn, Councillor Andrea Campbell, Councillor Kenzie Bach, Councillor Lydia Edwards, Councillor Michelle Wu, and that's it for now. So to get started, this hearing was called in response to what has become a childcare crisis, not only here in Boston, but across the state of Massachusetts. Affordable quality childcare is a critical issue for parents who are trying to juggle work and family life. The economics of childcare often mean that it is more financially prudent for one parent, if a family has two parents, one parent, usually the woman, give up her job or even on a part-time basis to stay home to care for the children. These are tough choices for families, and the long-term costs for women are immense as they miss out on promotions and lose earning capacity, which has long-term, lifelong consequences, especially when they reach retirement age. In communities of colour and low-income families are finding affordable quality childcare is even more difficult. Our childcare industry in Boston was already struggling before the COVID crisis with the loss of hundreds of small family daycares across the city. Whether we're talking about home-based, family-centred childcare or centre-based daycare, this industry is in crisis. And the COVID crisis has just exacerbated an already very difficult landscape for these businesses. The purpose of this hearing today is to lift up these concerns and try to identify solutions that would revitalise this essential service. We hope that this conversation today will help guide our path to finding workable solutions and provide affordable, quality daycare for every family and every child in Boston. Daycare is a necessity. I'd also like to call on my co-sponsors to make opening statements, and then we will move on to hearing from the panelists who are waiting to make testimony. Thank you. I'd call on my co-sponsor, Councillor Wu. Would you like to make an opening statement at this time?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for your leadership. I am keeping my video off precisely for the challenges and complications associated with this issue. And you'll probably hear sounds too related to this issue. I want to note that this has been an ongoing conversation on the council, that a number of years ago, councilors, and in particular the then 4 women of color who were serving on the Boston City Council, came together and spent a whole year examining various facets of the challenges with childcare in Boston, including help from some of the very panelists here today. And it was dire then. It was a series of hardships and barriers and lack of information. And now COVID has just amplified that exponentially. So we're at a place where my belief is that we're not even having the right conversations about a recovery and a reopening, that we cannot even pursue that kind of thinking unless we are first safeguarding and supporting access to quality childcare. It is so fundamental to our economy, to our families, and everything else. So I'm excited to dig into this issue from the lens of short-term recovery, but also the long-term implications for how we expand access across the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. I think you were on mute, but I heard you. Thank you, Councilor Braden. And of course, thank you, Councilor Wu, for the partnership. And similar, to Councilor Wu, we both personally have talked about how hard it is to work. We both have 2 children, and to do it without childcare. This is an incredibly important issue to me, not only professionally, but also personally. And I too want to thank my council colleagues for doing this work years ago. Like Councilor Wu mentioned, 4 women councilors at the time came together to dive into this issue, and it's only gotten worse since we held really incredible hearings on this topic of discussion. And so now is the time for action to respond to the dire situation in which this industry finds itself. Childcare in Massachusetts is the 2nd most expensive in the nation, and we've known this for a very long time. The number of childcare seats has been decreasing significantly over the last few years. Seats in Massachusetts have decreased 25% in the last 4 years, and Boston has lost 40% of its family childcare businesses in the last 10 years. High quality, affordable childcare is hard to come by for families in my district, which is largely Dorchester and Mattapan, a little bit of Jamaica Plain and Rosendale. The pandemic has thrown our childcare sector into crisis, forcing businesses to close their doors temporarily, and some sadly permanently, and take on even more responsibilities and costs to keep kids safe and staff safe as well, if and when they do decide to reopen. We're hearing from many childcare providers and business owners that the state regulations are burdening businesses with costs that will force them to raise tuition for families, and childcare business has been largely left out of the small business loan programs. Parents in Boston also cannot afford an increase in the cost of childcare. It is already too high. Due to the pandemic, many are struggling just to pay rent and put food on the table. Many have lost their jobs or are waiting for the state and the school to reopen so they can go back to work. We need emergency investments in our childcare sector and other creative solutions to address this crisis, help our families get back to work, and ensure all our kids have access to programming, early ed, and care that will put them on the path for success. Their livelihood and most of our children's dreams depend on it, and our economy also depends on it. I'm looking forward to today's hearing to directly hear from our courageous providers who've been doing this work for a really long time. Thank you for your work and your leadership. I also am looking forward to partnering with you on solutions in the immediate to help all in terms of this crisis. And thank you, of course, to my council colleagues, but also those who have decided to join us this morning. And I have to give a quick shout out to 2 of my summer interns and fellow, Diana and Danielle. Thank you for your work and your leadership and research on this topic. Really appreciate it. I've been giving shout outs all summer long to this additional human capital in my office because we can't do this work without an incredible team. So thank you. And again, Councilor Braden, thank you so much for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Now I would like to call on Councillor Flynn to make some brief comments.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Braden. Thank you, Councillor Braden, Councillor Wu, Councillor Campbell, for sponsoring this important hearing. Again, thank you to Councilor Braden for chairing it. Childcare is, as Councilor Campbell mentioned, it's very expensive. It's hard to find. With the ongoing pandemic, it's gotten more difficult for parents to find childcare as facilities close and schools close. Having childcare is a very important factor for parents to be able to work and for our essential workers who are on the front lines of this pandemic. It's even more critical that they have access to affordable and reliable childcare. And I also wanted to note that, you know, the women on the city council and the mothers on the city council, you make this body exceptionally better, because we learn about the incredible hard work that you do, but also the incredible challenges also of childcare that most families face. Immigrant families, many single parents as well, affording childcare, but just observing the mothers on the city council, how hard they work, and that balance, it makes our city better, but we want to try to make that available for everyone. So I just want to acknowledge my councilors. I'm so glad we're having this hearing today, and I hope we can come up with a solution to provide more affordable childcare to more parents throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I will now call on Councillor Bach to make some brief statement, if she so wishes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be very brief. Just thank you and all the sponsors for this important hearing today. And just really, I think, I think the economic role of childcare has become super clear in this pandemic, as suddenly everyone realizes that you can't talk about any aspect of our economy and any set of essential workers without talking about childcare. But I also just want to lift up the fact that I think, when we think about early childhood education and high quality early child care, I mean, it's really probably the single thing that a marginal additional dollar makes the biggest impact in people's life long term. And I just think that, I feel like we've reached a stage where we sort of pay lip service to that, but not a stage where we actually put the kind of money and resources as a society into young children that we should be, and that we have all of the science and evidence and et cetera to support. And I worry sometimes that that's because they're not 18 and they don't vote and they don't get to speak for themselves. And I just, I think it's so important for us to shift the balance of investment in our society as a whole in this direction. And that does mean paying the folks who take care of them a living wage and really supporting high quality environments. So I'm excited to be here today. And I just think, we've got a lot of work to do on this front. So thank you so much, Madam Chair. Oh, and wait, sorry, Madam Chair. And a shout out to, we've got a whole bunch of our Success Link fellows for the summer watching the hearing, and they've been doing great work diving into understanding the work of the City Council. So just wanted to shout out to them too.
Thank you. Let's see. Councillor Edwards, would you like to make a statement?
Yes. Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Very briefly, I just want to thank all of you for hosting this committee, or hosting this very important hearing. We are in a crisis, but I also feel that this kind of conversation helps us to understand we didn't get here by accident. We can figure out ways, creative ways to help support the children and the families in Boston. I hope part of this conversation will include childcare cooperatives. A lot of us came together for mutual aid for food. Is there a way for us to discuss mutual aid and care for our kids and children who may be too young for school? I just believe that amongst all of these hands, and with, of course, the incredible steadfast leadership of my dear friend Tanya, that we can come up with something. And I hope that we're not just going to talk about what's going wrong, but any model, any idea that we can think of right now to help with childcare and especially the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anissa Savvy-George, would you like to make a statement?
Sure, I'll just be very brief. Thank you, Councilor Braden. As the mother of 4, including triplets, childcare, especially when they were young, and early education was really important to us as a family. And finding it was critical to not just their well-being, but my well-being as well as in my career. So childcare and early education provides not just an opportunity for women in particular, but families to be in the workplace and be active in the workplace, but to have those careers and to earn wages and salaries that allow us to continue to stay here in the city. So there are all of these different components that are so important when discussing childcare. It's not just about someone to watch the kids, but it's about someone to nurture and love and care and teach our children, but also create opportunities so that women in particular, but families who are in the workforce have the opportunity to do that. I think one of the interesting pieces that we talked about quite a bit when we had done this series a number of years ago was the discussion, the conversation around off shift hours. And so when we talk about shift workers, or we talk about families who have a unusual or atypical work schedule that is becoming more and more typical in the workforce, that we're also responding to that need, because there is childcare and early education needs that still need to be met, regardless of sort of the family dynamic and the family makeup and the opportunities and the assistance that families need depending on their work schedule. So there's all of these very interesting pieces that go into this, but then in the end, it needs to be affordable and accessible, and we need to have the seats that fulfill the demand of our families and make it easier for families to grow in the city of Boston, to stay in the city of Boston, and access the services they need. So a lot on today's agenda. I actually, with all that being said, I will be sneaking out a few minutes early as we have a hearing this afternoon about the Boston Public Schools. So sort of a little bit of the other end of the spectrum this afternoon. So thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the makers for bringing this before us today.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Flaherty, would you like to make a brief statement?
Sure, very brief. Good morning, Madam Chair. Obviously, thank you for hosting and for your leadership along with the co-sponsors on this issue. As a father of 4 with a set of twins, I've got a front row seat, firsthand experience as to how important childcare and daycare is for our working families in Boston. And kudos to you. You were on this early, Madam Chair, and it was one of the industries and services that was cut early in the pandemic. And so it's very timely, particularly as we start to talk about the potential for the boomerang effect of COVID-19 and what's that going to mean as we're contemplating sort of school issue as to whether kids are going to be going back to school and in what form, what's that going to look like, but also as folks start to get back to work, with their households and how we're going to handle the demand for daycare and for childcare. And again, we all know these experiences. I don't envy my colleagues, particularly those with the younger children, in terms of just the dynamic of being able to sort of juggle all of that. So, my children are obviously a little older now, so didn't have some of those concerns during this pandemic, but I can relate and know that families were basically turned upside down when things started to shut down, and childcare and daycare was one of the first to be impacted by it. So again, timely, look forward to getting the testimony and how do we work together moving forward in the event that as we prepare potentially for another round of this, and what is our city's childcare and daycare system going to look like, and how we're going to function with or without it. So thank you, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on this.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Council President Ginny, would you like to make some brief remarks?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to thank you for your leadership on this issue, and certainly the other makers, Councillor Campbell and Councillor Wu. Councillor Wu being a counselor who has made history, being the first woman to actually deliver and give birth while being a counselor. And so I know all of us on this call understand this issue intimately from the perspective of being working moms. And I also understand it from another perspective, and that is a lifetime ago, back in the 90s, I was doing community organizing for Parents United for Childcare. And we were fighting for high quality, affordable childcare. At that time, childcare was the second most costly expense, second only to the housing cost for families. And I'm sure that is still true to this day. And so that goes to show that we have not made as much progress. So I think we've made progress in terms of improving quality and trying to make sure that families had access through perhaps state resources and vouchers. The need is so much greater than we really understand, and particularly now. This is critical and always has been in terms of being a good foundation. We need good, high quality, affordable, accessible childcare so that we can have a good foundation for the K through 12 experience here in Boston, but also this is critical to our economic recovery. So I am grateful for the conversation. I know that I won't be able to stay for the entire thing, but look forward to reviewing the tape. This is an issue near and dear to my heart. I see many friends from the advocacy world from a lifetime ago who are still at it. So thank you for your work, and thank you again to the makers.
Thank you, Councillor Jane, Madam President. Now, we will move on now to our panelists. We have 3 panels this morning. Panel 1, I'm very honoured and delighted to welcome Tanya Del Rio, who's the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement. Welcome, Tanya. Would you like to make your remarks now? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Braden, and all of the councillors for having me and the rest of the panelists here today. I very much look forward to learning and to hearing what everybody else has to say. What I want to do is just start out by putting some numbers behind many of the issues that the councillors have shared, and then later I'll provide an outline of what the City of Boston efforts have been so far to address this. So I want to say first that the City of Boston, we've made a real effort to prioritize childcare even before the pandemic, because we recognize it as a sector in crisis, and it's a crisis that's been causing repercussions for working people of all backgrounds, but especially women and people in lower wage occupations, which is why the Office of Women's Advancement is part of the team at the city that includes multiple departments that's working on this. But COVID has really turned this reality into a crisis within a crisis. So I'll provide some context about that too. I'll share some statistics, some of which come from the city's first survey on childcare that we included in the city census last year, and also some that result from our collaboration with the Department of Early Care and Education of the Commonwealth, which has, our relationship has strengthened during COVID, and we really appreciate the work that we've been able to do with them to understand what's happening specifically in Boston. And after I'm done, I'll just put some links in the chat that we can share. But so pre-COVID, the reality was that we really only had seats for half of Boston's children who were under 5. And so that was already a challenging situation. And we saw that reflected in our survey when we asked families what their challenges were. 32% of families of children 0 to 3 and 27% of families with children 3 to 5 were telling us that childcare was very difficult to even find. And it was something they were spending significant time on, taking days off work just to find a seat. But it's very important to note that availability alone doesn't equal access, right? Affordability pre-COVID was a top concern for Bostonians, really of all backgrounds, in all of the neighborhoods. We had 86% of our participants telling us that not affordable was a significant challenge for them. So we don't have enough seats, and then when they are there, they're not even affordable for them. So the other side of this is that we know early educators are a workforce that's providing a lot more benefits and a lot more value to all of us as a society than is reflected in their compensation. And so I agree, we need to increase their pay so they can continue providing high quality care that is, that puts children on a path to positive outcomes later in life, but also enables workers from all industries to participate in the labor force. I have to note that childcare workers are overwhelmingly female. In Boston, majority people of color, and there's a very high immigrant representation in this workforce. So for us as women's advancement, fair pay for people in this occupation would bring us one step closer to closing wage gaps and pay gaps that still really weigh heavy on our shoulders as a society. But we know again that working families can't and should not really be the ones to bear more of the economic burden, as has been mentioned. And so that's kind of where we were before COVID. Now, as a result of the pandemic, we are observing how severe economic hardship is resulting in the city losing a significant portion of our previous childcare capacity, possibly permanently. And I just wanted to share what we know about this. So 578 out of 773 programs have reopened in Boston. That's 70% of our programs, and they represent 65% of our previous capacity. The pace of the reopenings has been slowing in the last week, so our worry is that it's possible that we may have lost between 20 to up to 35% of our previous capacity permanently. And this is assuming that all of the reopened programs are going to be able to make it through the next month. And that's, very unclear because we don't know whether families are planning on coming back to the programs. This is obviously understandable given all the health concerns. Our office is trying to understand this situation through a series of focus groups. So far, we've ran 10. And if you're interested in some of the takeaways, I'm happy to share. The main one is that the situation is hard, and what people are sacrificing to keep everything afloat is their own well-being and mental health is the real bottom line there. So anyway, as I mentioned before, our office identified this issue and began discussing ways to address it about 3 years ago. The focus of our work has been research, direct support to family childcare. Specifically, we focused on them because they're particularly vulnerable. They're serving families with lower incomes, and also they're the most flexible. So those families who do work non-standard hours disproportionately go to family childcare. So that's why we focused on supporting them. So in last year, we piloted what we're calling the Childcare Entrepreneur Fund. We supported 22 family childcare owners with direct cash grants and also technical workshops where they could learn business skills. Those workshops included some information about cooperative practices that was mentioned, and we onboarded them into the shared services platform, for example, in the United Way, and started that conversation about how cooperativism could improve their outcomes. And so that's ongoing work. This year, we will be able to support 75 entrepreneurs thanks to new city investments and also funding from the Office of Workforce Development. So we're excited about that. This year, we received 325 applications to this fund out of 489 licensed family childcares existing in Boston. This means that we increased applications by 72% as compared to last year. And it also means that 67% of all family childcares in the city are applying for this funding. So to me, that said, the need is great, and that so far, we have a good start, but we can't begin to cover all the need with our available resources. So for us in Women's Advancement and the team that works on this, I should definitely mention the Economic Mobility Lab and the Small Business Office in the city that are big partners. Our next step is to start seeking external funding, whatever funding we can to grow this successful program, and complete evaluation of the first round so we can formalize our lessons learned and implement them in the next versions of this. Our other next steps are also to advocate at the state and federal level for increased funding, because the city can do a lot, and we can call attention to this issue and start supporting individual entrepreneurs and family childcares, but it doesn't really cover the need. I believe strongly that we need to advocate for increased funding at federal and state level. and then just continue our research to understand family need and family arrangements and family challenges. That has been an area where there's not a lot of information. So we hope to include our census survey in the 2021 mailing. Last thing I'll say is that there are very few cities at the municipal level really that work on this topic. So for Boston, I believe it's very important for us to tell this story so that we can start seeing more replication and even more attention at the national and state level. The solution, I guess, as I said, has to involve also a significant shift in our collective mindset, because we have to understand that early education should be or is a public good, a critical part of the infrastructure for a modern workforce. And for me, the conversation is getting there, but it's not quite there yet. So we need to bring it there. And I think hearings like this are extremely helpful in this endeavor. And yeah, I'll just conclude by saying thank you for inviting us. I really look forward to listening to the rest of the testimony and to providing what answers I can to any questions that arise.
Thank you, Tanya. I'll just ask my colleagues if they have any questions for Tanya this time. Thank you so much. There's a lot of really good information in that, and I'm very impressed with the leadership role that you're taking in this field and the great work that you're doing. There's so much to do, and I hope we can bring more hands on deck to help move this issue forward through this process.
Thank you.
Anyone have questions for Tanya at this time? We're joined by Councillor Mejia. Just like to welcome you.
Yeah, I have my blue hand up, Councillor Braden. I just want to, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a few blue hands up in the panel, just so you know.
I need to look at the blue hands, yes.
Yes,
little...
look at the blue hands. Every voice is going to be heard up in here. You hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much for hosting, and thank you to the sponsors for bringing us together. I have to say, Ms. Del Rio, is that I was, hearing you speak and just how super conscious you are about this particular issue. I wasn't sure. I mean, I heard the voice. I wasn't on the screen, so I couldn't tell who it was. And I thought it was an advocate in the child care space who was speaking initially. I did not know, because I had tuned in a little bit later, that it was actually somebody who is working for the city. So it was just, it's so warming and comforting knowing that that's someone who deeply understands this issue from your own experience as a parent, number one, and as a working mom. To have you in this role and this time is really comforting. So thank you for the presentation. I'm a little bit late, so I did miss some of it. But I do have just a few questions, if you don't mind, and I'll put my glasses on. So the first one is, can you just talk a little bit about the childcare internship entrepreneurship program a little bit more? What do those classes look like? Who are they made available to? And if you happen to have any information about the breakdown by neighborhood and race, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So the childcare entrepreneurship workshops focus on the business skills. The reason we did this was because before we designed the program, we went out and visited a bunch of family childcares in their homes, and we had dozens of conversations with them. And one of the things that came away from that was that they identify and are very confident in their skills as educators, and they see themselves as great educators, but they didn't see themselves as business people yet, and didn't identify as business people, even though they're entrepreneurs, they own their business. And so they thought that they could receive a lot of support in that part of their journey. And so we validated this too by speaking with practitioners from Umass Boston, who I believe Ann Douglas is one of the panelists and can speak more to this, who were already running some of these workshops trying to cover that gap, right? So they, for example, business skills aren't necessarily part of the required professional development that they go through for their licensing, etc. And so that's where we honed in, that's where we understood there to be a gap. And the participants of the first cohort let us know it had been very helpful for them. So more concretely, the workshops, there's 6 workshops, and they focus on like budgeting. For example, how do you understand the money that's coming in, the money that's coming out of your business, how to separate that from your personal finances, how to open up a bank account that's just for your business. For example, this is something that was a very big hurdle for family childcare to access the PPP program and some of the other assistance programs that have come from the federal government for coronavirus, because they didn't normally have a bank account that's separate for the businesses and all of these hurdles. The workshop would have helped if they had gone through that. So it's marketing, it's budgeting, it's some legal support. There is less on licensing, but there's a little bit about that. And I can go ahead.
Yeah, no, if you I'm just curious about the race and the neighborhoods. If you just give me just a quick high level, if you happen to have that data.
Yes. I have to look for it in my drive, but I do have it. Do you want last year's cohort or this year's? I have both.
Oh, whichever one either
the one I have in front of me right now is from last year. So we had 33% of the cohort was from Dorchester. I think it's 15 from Hyde Park. Roxbury had 11. I can't see it. I need to find I need to pull it up.
In terms, I'm really looking in terms of the diversity too. Were these opportunities offered in multiple languages? Was the outreach done in a way that would help support immigrant providers as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did the outreach last year in 6 languages, and we did the same this year. Every single provider that had a license received a postcard in the mail that was in Spanish and English. And there was simultaneous translation in the workshop. So last year, once we the cohort, we asked them who would need translation, and we had Cantonese speakers and we had Spanish speakers who didn't speak English. So those were the languages that we provided. It's the same thing this year. So they let us know what language they need, and we provide the translation with the support of the Office of Language Access and Communications for the city. So this year, the languages we have represented are Haitian, Creole, and Spanish, and they'll be having virtual translation, which is something we didn't know how to do, but we're learning how to do for the workshops that start next month.
That's great. That's great. And then I know this will be my last question, because I want just really curious about when I think about the affordability. I know that oftentimes you have to either be of a certain income, but there are families, there are working moms who only have one household income, who don't qualify for subsidies. How are we looking in terms of affordability, and how are we looking to support some of those parents who may fall outside of the that threshold of affordability and accessibility?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The program is set up to help the providers and to support and work with the providers. We felt like we had enough data about the providers, and we understood their issues because we were able to identify and talk to them directly well enough to design a program around that. For the family side, for the working family side, we didn't, and kind of still don't feel like we understand the general problem well enough, because there's hardly any data on it. And that's why we've focused on starting to learn more about it. We did the census survey last year, we'll do it next year, and we're doing the focus group now, because it's just such a different situation for every different family. We don't feel equipped yet to come up with, a solution that will fit, right, for every family. So I will say we don't have programming yet to support working families, and the childcare fund is more focused for the providers.
Yeah.
Let me actually give you the breakdown for the applicant pool this year that I just pulled up. We have 20% of the applicants were Black or African American, almost 40% were Latinx, and white, Native American, Hawaiian Pacific Islander were below 5%. And for the neighborhoods, the highest representation we had Dorchester, next came Hyde Park and Roxbury, then Mattapan, Roslindale, East Boston, Jamaica Plain. The rest of the neighborhoods had about 2% application.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I am so glad that you're in the position that you're in. I don't give a lot of compliments, so that just so you know, you definitely are working hard on behalf of women, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. I need to try and keep us on time, so if we could limit and all of those questions were great questions and great information, Councillor Mejia, but I'd like to try and keep each segment to about 5 minutes if possible. Councillor Wu?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to stay well under, hopefully, the 5 minutes. So, hi, Tanya.
Hi.
So my understanding is that the funding and the grants that were given out are from federal funding related to the CARES Act, or is it a different source?
No, the funding for the Childcare Entrepreneur Fund comes from the city budget. And so it's $97,000 from the city budget. And this year we got a one-time infusion from the Office of Workforce Development.
Okay, got it. And sorry to just review that. You said that something like 2/3 of the city's providers applied, and how many were on the wait list versus were able to receive it?
Yeah, so right now we accepted 50, which makes 2 cohorts. We'll likely be able to accept 25 more in the winter. So that's 75 out of 300 and change applications that we were able to accept. Yeah.
Got it. And then just shifting gears, in terms of COVID's impacts, I know, shout out also to Ginger from my team, who has helped prepare and put together a great list of questions. So the state had been criticized for not providing complete data on COVID cases related to emergency childcare centers. Did you have any feedback or insights in terms of Boston's childcare centers and in the emergency ones, how those might have been impacted with cases, and then moving forward, what tracking or contact tracing mechanisms might there be to understand how reopening and rising infections will be able to stay under control?
Right. So the short end, I'll try to keep short. During the closures, I guess, when the emergency programs were running for the state, we asked for this information, and we're told that they weren't tracking or sharing at least the reason for closure, but that they would share with us when they were closures, which they did. So for example, if an emergency program closed, we would know the day of, and then we would find out when it would open again. And so that data we have for now that they've gone back to their normal licensing process, we are able also to track closures when they happen, just through the numbers that they are sharing, but not reasons for closure, if that makes sense. So we're able to see if something closes, but we don't know the reason. So we can't say whether they closed for COVID exposure or whether they closed because of any other reason.
Okay, got it. And you feel, in terms of the system moving forward, will there be mechanisms to think about how childcare centers are being affected by COVID?
Do you mean if there's going to be a mechanism for the state and the city to share information, or if they're going to? Yeah. I don't know if they're going to.
Okay.
They're going to establish.
Okay, great. And then this isn't just a request for later, if possible, to get a data set in terms of who received funds for the childcare grant program. I don't know if it's possible to, if you have sort of MWBE status as well as kind of which neighborhood is represented, that would be really appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. We have that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. Let's see who's next. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. I will try to be very brief. Thank you, Tanya. Tanya, my question is, in District 2, I represent a large Chinese community, Chinese population. Many of them are immigrants. Many of the women work in hotels that have been, they're cleaning rooms. They work at Local 26 Unite. The hotels were closed. They're starting to open again. A lot of college students are moving into some of these hotels as well. But my concern is for the woman in childcare issues. You know, depending on what their work schedule is, and then their child is in the Boston public school system, how does a mother try to balance going to work so she can pay her bills, but also her child, I'm sorry, in the child going to school?
I will say very, very difficult, and every family is coming up with, different ad hoc arrangements that will change week to week, sometimes day by day, which is obviously a stressor for the family, obviously a stressor for the child. And I see Lindsay Mccleskey here. I expect you to be talking about this. But one of the main things that I would talk about is the reliance on family, friend, and neighbor care, which is essentially free work, free labor, mostly from women. So think neighbors, grandmothers, friends. And so that's, our economy is really resting on the backs of women who are providing a lot of this free labor. And the one other thing I'd mention here is the importance then of legislation like Fair Work Week, that will give people more control and more predictability in their schedules that will allow them to arrange for childcare. So that's something I know the city advocated for last session, and we should continue to do that. And other legislation that people have, more reliable access to quality childcare. And the word quality there is important too, because that's an equity issue, right? You can't just expect children to grow up in any environment. It has to be an environment that'll allow them an opportunity to be successful in the future in every way.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any more questions. I want to say thank you to Tanya, and I liked your answer. And as the economy slowly opens, it's going to be, the success of Boston in a way is going to be because of the hard work of a lot of immigrant workers, a lot of women that are in our hotels working hard, cleaning rooms, the members of Local 26, and that's really, that's why I think Boston is going to be successful, is because of a lot of these hardworking women that are risking everything for our city and their family as well. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Next up, Councillor Campbell, have you got some questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden, and thank you, Tanya, for just all of your work with respect to this issue. And one thing I will say is that I think you're exactly right. The reframing is critically important. So I think now more and more folks are talking about this issue in terms of its effect on the economy. Most, I think, already got how important it was to a child's development, of course. But one layer I do want to add that I think is critically important too, and I have heard this from many providers, is we often talk about it in terms of the 3-year-olds and the 4-year-olds, but really it's the birth to 5-year-old issue, right? And really, maybe even pre-birth, right? When you were pregnant, all the things that you could be doing to support your child. And if you're connected to services and programs early on, there's a incredible benefit to that. So I really been pushing the city to frame it to cover more of our young people, and to say it's not just about the child, it's also about the parents. And so and also in thanking you, I want to thank Ron Dorsey as well, who I saw was attending, given his leadership on this issue when he was here at the city. I want to be mindful that we have a lot of panelists, so I'll ask just, I guess, one question that I have, in addition to sort of pushing the reframing of the issue, also pushing the city to create a greater infrastructure to deal with this. You were one person who is doing amazing work in this space, along with, I think, like probably 30 other issues. I think this is such a major issue that requires such detailed, responsive work, right? You're talking about surveys, the importance of data collection, coordinating in, the private sector is showing up with respect to solutions. The state, federal government, providers, advocates on the ground. I mean, there's so many stakeholders who want to play a role in making sure that every family has access to affordable care. There are resources, monetary, there are experts, right? I really would love to see the city hire someone and create infrastructure that specifically supports this issue, where it's not only coordinating all of the resources that currently exist, speaking to the gaps, and then making it public, right? So a parent can go on a website in the city of Boston and see all that is available to them, because there are a lot of solutions, but it is hard to navigate these systems. And so I guess my one question has to do with, where do you think we could be doing better as a city with respect to the infrastructure we need to really tackle this issue?
I mean, I'll be short and I'll say I completely agree. And I will repeat the shout out to Ron Dorsey, who's continuing to exercise leadership on this, but now from the private sector lens. So yeah, I agree. The Boston Opportunity Agenda issued a report on the state of early childhood education. I believe it was last year. And that was one of the recommendations that they issued to the city, that they have a dedicated kind of czar or person to do this. Currently what we have is a group of departments. So thank you for your belief in me, but it's definitely not just me working on this. Yeah, we have the Economic Mobility Lab, teams from like different departments of the city coming together to form this task force. I guess that's pushing all of this work, but it does require tremendous coordination, tremendous time commitment and work. And I think if we could be doing a lot more, for example, with private sector, as you mentioned, we could be growing this program and kind of speed up the work relating to supporting families. If we had if we had more resources, capacity is always a challenge for us.
Well, that's just my one point, and I'm going to continue to push that piece, because I think that's where we have tremendous control on our side. We, of course, want the federal government to issue a bailout for this industry, but where we have control, would love to see faster movement on setting up that infrastructure. So we'll continue the conversation. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Council Braden.
Thank you. I think that concludes our questions for this panel. For Tanya, I had just one question. You mentioned the workshops, the training that was available. What time of day were those workshops held? Was it midday, or was it an accessible time for folks who maybe are taking care of kids during the day? Were there evening workshops to help?
Yes, all the workshops were either on a weekday evening at 6:30 or a Saturday morning at 9. And this time around, we're keeping that same schedule, weekday evenings or Saturday mornings.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Having workshops in the middle of the day is not a good plan for daycare workers, daycare centers.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair.
Sorry, beg your pardon, Councillor Bach. Sorry, I'm missing I'm missing the little blue hands. Councillor Bach, you're next.
Sorry, it was delayed in going up. I'll be brief. Tanya, I just wanted to ask, I'm curious, I think the last time we sat down and talked about this topic, I was still at the Housing Authority. And one of the things we were talking about is just, we've got a lot of folks who provide daycare in their units, in Housing Authority buildings where they're not licensed. And we're talking about the sort of how to create a path to licensure to help those be better compensated careers for people. And obviously one of the things that came up a lot in that conversation was the constraints of the space. And one of the things I'm thinking about now in terms of COVID and supporting our healthcare worker, our childcare workers in COVID is sort of like, what's the apparatus for supporting these unlicensed providers in some of the kind of spaces that, as we know, we're already providing a barrier to licensure. And now with COVID, you know, they might need help in thinking about how to adapt. And so I'm just curious whether you guys have tackled that at all. From thinking through kind of like how we support that informal economy, because it's a big piece of this.
Yeah, in short, the way we're trying to tackle that is by offering some of the Childcare Entrepreneur Fund grants to aspiring childcare entrepreneurs. So last time and this time as well, some of the grants went to people who are starting the process of licensure to become a new family childcare. So that's the way to get people who may know or may have been informally practicing this into the formal realm. And then for the Boston Housing Authority, the work we've done and want to intensify and continue to do is to make sure that all property managers understand that family childcare is allowed and sometimes even encouraged in BHA, because that's not sometimes uniformly clear, and that's what we want to do. And we've prioritized BHA providers as recipients of the fund, and we continue to receive lots of applications from BHA providers, which is good.
Great. All right. Well, those are all my questions for now. Thank you so much again, like everyone said, for all your work on this.
Thanks.
Councillor Edwards.
Hi, thank you so much. Tanya, I really do appreciate your administering the fund and looking at different ways in which people on the ground were getting resources. I had mentioned cooperatives and informal childcare kind of groupings or pods. I don't know if your office is looking at that or guidelines. I'm wondering if there's ways to help support or grow those options, especially because they're worker owned. And in many cases, there are a lot of, immigrants who could benefit from that structure.
Yeah, so we had a formal grant for cooperatives the first time around, and we worked directly with the groups that we had identified with the help of the GMA project, with CCDS in East Boston, to see if we could source applicants for that specific grant, where we would give assistance to providers who wanted to come together and form childcare cooperatives. We found that they either felt they weren't quite ready to apply for that yet, or just weren't there in the process. So what we've done really beyond that is not much. We just kept in touch with them and monitored their process to see when would be the right time for us to come in with financial support. So we're interested, we want to, we just haven't found a way forward yet.
I understand, and I do appreciate the forward thinking of the grant to begin with. One other area I'd like to ask about is space. I know we're talking about workers and whether people, I know we're talking about workers, but in terms of space, is there actually enough space or childcare facilities? For example, I'd love to think that there's more conversations with developers as they're building up, that they kind of prioritize commercial space or daycare space now. And how can we push for that with huge developments that are happening, especially in East Boston? How do we get them to prioritize, at least temporarily, can you make this community room or this space one for childcare during a pandemic? I'm wondering if your office is thinking about creative spaces that we can move to. That's it for me. Thank you.
This would be very, very long conversation, but what I'll just surface here is that the zoning code does have, I forgot the acronym, but it does have a regulation that says for projects that meet a certain threshold of size, that there needs to be a contribution for childcare seats to be created on site, or a contribution for them to be created elsewhere in the city. And that's something that our city's been looking at, and where we've recently been included in the kind of notification list for the BPDA for when those projects come online. Women's Advancement automatically will come in and kind of make the developer aware and advocate for the for either the payment of those funds or the inclusion of on-site facilities. It's something that we think should be taken. We should be taking advantage of it, because it is funding that's going to create new seats. Currently, we don't know of too many projects that are coming online that meet those thresholds, but we're always keeping our eyes open about that, and we hope that the use of those funds can be as flexible as possible.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you on those thresholds. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Next up, we have President Janey, followed by Councillor Flaherty. President Janey.
Thank you so much, and I'll be really quick. I know you've got a lot of panelists, and I apologize if I missed it earlier. I was just wondering if you could speak more to the gap. I think in your opening presentation, Tanya, you talked about, was it 30% that we would see a loss and not coming back in terms of childcare seats? Was that seats? Was that workers? Like, what was that? And then what's the plan to address that gap? Because clearly, as we've all indicated, we were in crisis before this crisis is compounding the current childcare crisis. So we were already, dealing with a shortage, I think, in terms of, high quality, affordable, accessible childcare seats. So what was the figure, 30%?
Yeah, so we're measuring capacity and programs. So 70% of the programs have come back. So that's either family childcare or centers. They've come back.
So do you have the analysis by seats? Do you have a sense of how many seats we lost based on the 30% that hasn't come back?
Yes, so we've recovered 65% of the seats. That means we right now have a little bit over 21,000 seats, and we used to have 41,000. Some providers are planning to reopen more based on the school calendar, and some of them are looking at school guidelines and practices to open. So what we're doing now is just monitoring to see how that goes in September to see if we recover a bit more, hopefully. But the curve has slowed, right? So we saw a big number of them reopening in the first weeks of July. That slowed down. We think there might be a small little second peak sometime in September. And by then we'll, I think, kind of know about how many we lost maybe permanently. So the figure would be, I think it's...
So, but is the plan, so when you say we'll know how many we lost permanently, is the plan, so we just take that loss? Or are we trying to, how are we trying to recover those seats? Like, if not with those providers, it seems to me that there was already a constant, how do we develop new providers, make sure that they, get whatever certification or training, the professionalism needed for this field, and that there was some effort. I don't know if it was your department within the city. I certainly know within Boston Public Schools, there was an effort around early child care providers who were either center-based or home-based, and making sure that they were getting the kind of same, particularly for the 3- and 4-year-olds, that they were getting the same kind of curriculum for BPS. So I'm not sure in terms of loss of those 30% or 35% seats, what we're doing to recover and then to continue to build. Like, I wouldn't want to just be left with that loss. And I know things are going to be a process as we try to recover, and as more and more people are going out to work, we will need, obviously, these childcare seats more and more.
Yeah, we've heard from providers that the challenges are, one, financial, and 2, staffing, right? They're losing a lot of their teachers. And so I think those are the 2 areas where we need to focus on: providing funding, city, state, federal, again, and then understanding how to fill those staffing gaps and needs. And then you mentioned the efforts for UPK. I should also mention that there's all of the work I described today, plus the city's effort on universal pre-K, which are led by BPS and focusing obviously on the 4-year-olds. And so there's centers and providers that work with the UPK team at BPS that will be receiving support.
And my last question, did we see a dip in any of those? Thank you, Madam Chair. Did we see a dip in any of the UPK providers in terms of those we were working with, in terms of losing them, that they're not coming back? What's the percentage in terms of loss there?
Yeah, I have the aggregate figures, so I don't know specifically for UPA. We can get that from the BPS team.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, President Ginny. Councillor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to obviously thank Tanya for the work that she's doing, and obviously the administration, particularly in this space, surveying. I know that there's been work done to date. They're also surveying families and now launching, I believe, the second round of application for the Child Care Entrepreneur Fund. So I'm grateful for that work, especially the work of the Office of Women's Advancement and the Economic Mobility Lab, as well as the Office of Small Business for their work around this initiative. A couple of quick questions of Tanya. Tanya, what type of funding supports do applicants get as part of the Child Care Entrepreneur Fund?
They get $3,500 after they complete the skills workshops.
Got it. And then what type of support has the federal government and the state government provided healthcare facilities during this time?
So during this time, the state maintained payments for that they were providing for voucher children. So if you were providing care for a family that was eligible for vouchers, even though you were closed, as a provider, you continued receiving that payment. This obviously for providers that only received private pay, this put them in a bind because they received nothing. And then right now, I believe the state, I don't know actually the full scope of the funding they're providing, but I know they're going up to 80% of what they were providing. And then for federal, they were eligible for PPP and for small business loans that were forgivable. But there were significant barriers for them to receive this, like I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. Understand. I know child care providers, with the exception of the exempt emergency child care centers, were shut down. However, margins for many of the child care providers were already tight prior to COVID, and clearly they all have experienced a dramatic decrease in revenue throughout all of the daycare and child care centers. So it has to have been devastating for a lot of these centers that were already running tight on margins. Are we expecting businesses to continue to remain open after they were shut down for months without any income coming in? And I'm just going to make a quick analogy to our restaurant businesses where they've been shut down for a significant period of time. Some are arguing, 25%, possibly up to a third of Boston's restaurants will not reopen. And I just don't know whether or not, from your vantage point, Tanya, based on your training experience and what you're seeing happening across the city, is there potential for something like that to happen at our sort of our child care and daycare centers? That's what concerns me, given that some of these places have been shut down for a significant period of time. Do they have capacity, whether it's the Entrepreneur Fund money or if it's the PPP stuff? Is that enough to carry folks to allow them to kind of reboot, if you will? And if not, then clearly we're going to have a bigger problem on our hands. I wanted to maybe just get a sense from you as to whether you were sort of seeing a trend like that, and not to make an analogy, but I think it was an important analogy to make with respect to our restaurants and our other small businesses that have been struggling, and the fact that they've been shut down for so long. It's for many, it's insurmountable for them to open back up again. And I want to get your perspective on this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the issue. Thank you. That's the issue. I mean, during the I think it was in the middle of the pandemic that of the closure, EEC did do a survey of providers, and 40% of them said that they could not reopen if they were closed for more than 2 months. And so they already told us that was going to be a big issue. I'm monitoring the numbers now and trying to understand how many are able to reopen, and that's our big worry. I should say the networks of family childcares, that they provide some support in terms of giving the providers PPE or helping them find children to fill the seats, but that's the big challenge. And I think the analogy to the restaurant industry is accurate. I think a lot of programs are looking, large and small, are looking at the feasibility of reopening financially. And I think it's one of our biggest worries, that we didn't have enough capacity before. We're going to have even less now.
Right. And that's where I think we need to keep our eye on the ball. So I appreciate your perspective on that, Tanya. That arguably will be probably the most devastating impact if our existing facilities and centers are not able to reboot. And obviously call out and a shout out to grandmothers and grandfathers out there who are going to basically be enlisted and drafted into this function to support working families, but that's the major concern of mine is, despite all of our best efforts, the fact that these daycare and childcare centers have been closed for so long, they may not be able to reboot, and that would be devastating and catastrophic, I think, for our city and our residents, particularly working families across the city. So I appreciate everything you're doing. Please consider me a partner and an ally in this effort to get back on track with our childcare and daycare centers across the city. So thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the patience.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. I think that concludes all our questions for you, Tanya. You're very welcome to stay and listen to the rest of the testimony. I think we'd like to move on to the next panel. Thank you so much for all your work. I look forward to continuing this conversation and coming up with some good solutions on the way forward. Thank you so much. Next panel is, we're running slightly behind time already, so that's my fault. My bad. Next panel, we have Janie McDonald, Lindsay Mccloskey, Anne Douglas. Janie McDonald is the Family Child Care Coordinator for SEIU Local 509. Lindsay Mccleskey, Deputy Director of Community Labour United, and Anne Douglas is a PhD Executive Director of the Institute of Early Education Leadership Innovation at Umass, Boston. Thank you, everyone. You're very, very welcome. I'd just call on Jeannie to take the lead on this one, open up the conversation, introduce yourself, and welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Janae McDonald. I'm the Family Child Care Coordinator for SEIU Local 509, as Councilor Braden has mentioned. We're the union that represents over 20,000 human service workers and educators in Massachusetts. And with approximately 2,600 family child care providers in our purview, I want to again extend another thank you for inviting us to participate in this hearing on this crucial matter of child care crisis in Boston. Of our bargaining unit, we have 435 family child care providers in the Metro Boston area. There is a higher cost that comes within this industry, and it's already an underpaid industry. It was an underpaid industry prior to the pandemic. And providers are concerned with the increase of ongoing operating expenses, their ability to maintain steady income, continued risk of exposure, and potential surge of cases recurring, which we are starting to slightly see in the state now. Considering the demographics, adequately supporting family child care providers also comes down to a matter of equity. So we have to invest more in early education and do more to recruit and retain early educators, especially family child care providers. EEC has recently reported that all regions will see reductions in capacity this fall, but Metro Boston will be second to Western Massachusetts with the deepest capacity losses expected. EEC also noted that capacity losses are largely driven through center-based providers. So this leaves us to believe that families will become more reliant on family child care. So we need to be diligently working to better support family child care providers on a municipal level, a state level, and also a federal level. Families who work in lower wage jobs are almost always never employed in industries that allow them to perform their duties remotely. So like another counselor said, for example, your hospitality workers, some of your other essential workers, your grocery store workers. So childcare needs to work for working families who need to return to work, who will need to continue to return to work. So I just want to give a couple of examples of things that the union has proposed throughout the pandemic and throughout reopening considerations. And especially when we talk about the lower wage jobs, families that are not able to work remotely, when you talk about the hospitality positions, that will require parents to be able to work staggered or different shifts than maybe what they normally have worked. So financial incentives or differentials should be offered to family childcare providers who open their programs during non-standard hours. And non-standard hour care is a niche that family childcare providers will be able to speak to because they have the ability to open earlier or stay open later or give flex shifts or provide care over the weekend, which are just some things that center-based care has not been able to do. And I also want to highlight another one of our panel members, Lindsay Mccloskey from the CLU and 509 as a part of the Care That Works Coalition. We're actually working to launch a pilot in the coming weeks for non-standard hour care with family child care providers. There's also a need to expand, prior to COVID-19, the wait list for families that needed access to child care vouchers to give their families access to high quality care was already uncomfortably high prior to COVID-19. And, we need to make a demand for private employers to pay their fair share toward child care expenses for their employees, whether that's, includes in assisting with providing vouchers, prioritizing relief within a company for single parent households, or creating a child care reimbursement fund for employees. We also found that regional cost sharing opportunities for family child care providers are really important, especially when it comes to purchasing necessary supplies, because family child care providers operate as their own business. They're not able to compete with, larger organizations that may need to purchase sanitation supplies, PPE equipment, even books and things like that, that school districts have the ability to purchase things in a bulk order and become prioritized. So we think that having a regional cost sharing opportunity for FCCs where there is also a contribution either from the municipality or the state or some other outside funding source that can assist with that. Our last recommendation that we had given during the pandemic was giving providers a set basic income in addition to their current voucher per day per child reimbursement rate. And this would be based on no matter how many that they currently have enrolled or whether they have decided or whether they are, have to be open or not considering the pandemic. Meaning if they have to close due to regressions and the phases of the pandemic moving forward. This is especially important because the unemployment benefits and other PPP programs did not become available to family child care providers until so late within the pandemic. So many of our family child care providers had to deal with the loss of income, especially associated with some of their private pay slots. Lastly, I just want to say, providers have eagerly, been working to restructure their programs. They've been using their time off wisely, participating in training. And, a lot of them have taken on additional debt to cover the associated cost with safely reopening so that they can meet the demands of EEC, ensure the safety of their own families, and also ensure the safety of the children that they're educating and the families that send them there. These are women who put their homes and their businesses on the line for sake of caring for our children. And, there's always that lingering concern of liability as, cases start to slightly creep up in the state. And so I would just say we need to, increase recruitment efforts for more licensed providers and make it fiscally equitable to become a part of the field so that providers do not feel like they're spending, additional money, time, training, resources to advance their education. Many of our providers are even degree holders and are participating in professional development, but essentially with no real return on their investment to provide high quality care. So again, thank you for your time and consideration of solutions to this matter, and I'm open to any questions that I may be able to answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next panelist, Lindsay Mccleskey, and we'll ask our councillors to hold their questions to the end of the panel, and then we can round back and ask questions. Thank you so much. Thank you. Next, so Lindsay Mccleskey.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Braden, Councillor Wu, and Councillor Campbell for convening this really important hearing today. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to be speaking with all of the councillors and the other advocates that are here on this Zoom. So I'm Lindsay Mccleskey. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Labor United, and I'm also the mother of a 3-year-old. So I'm navigating the childcare and the challenging choices that parents of young kids and parents of school-age kids are having to make in this moment. And before I jump in, I do just want to say how amazing it is to see the such the big increased role that working moms have played in the leadership of the city of Boston. And it's been a huge inspiration to me as I've become a mother to know that, just because you have a little kid doesn't mean it has to hold you back. And childcare is such a huge component of enabling women to be able to move forward in their careers while they become moms. So thank you for that. So the reason Community Labor United has something to say about childcare is because we convene a coalition that Janae referenced in her comments called the Care That Works Coalition, which includes community-based groups and labor unions in the Boston area who are united to fight for an equitable childcare system that's centered on the needs of working class families in Boston, as well as the needs of the diverse childcare workforce. And the partners of our coalition include BEST, which is Unite Here Local 26's hospitality training program, Building Pathways, which is the pre-apprenticeship program for the building trades, focused on getting more women and people of color into the unions, Brookview House, Matahari Women's Worker Center, New England United for Justice, the Policy Group on Trades Women's Issues, SEIU Local 509, which Janae just spoke about their perspective, as well as the United Auto Workers Local 1596, who represents some childcare center workers in Boston and throughout Eastern Massachusetts. And so that's our coalition. So there's some sort of unlikely actors in that space. And the reason why this particular set of organizations came together is because we really identified that childcare is an issue that holds women back from pursuing some of the good unionized job opportunities in the city of Boston, including opportunities in hospitality and construction. And one of the key barriers that keeps women out of those good union jobs is because they can't find childcare for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is because of the non-standard hours that are prevalent in those industries. And so just briefly, I'm going to share a little bit more about that. And then I have some comments that are focused a little bit more broadly on some of our views about childcare in this moment. So we are, as Janae referenced, preparing to launch a pilot program with this kind of set of organizations that will focus on addressing the non-standard hour care challenge by organizing with the union, with 509, a set of family childcare providers in the city of Boston that are willing to adjust their hours to support women who want to go into construction and hospitality jobs through the two training programs that we're working with. And we're doing this and have designed a program in a way that will allow for the providers to be compensated at a higher level because of the sacrifice of shifting their hours. And we're very excited to get this off the ground soon. Just the geographic focus of the pilot will be focused on Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. Although we do have some folks in places like Hyde Park who are looking for childcare during non-standard hours as well. And so the geographic focus may shift, but we'll all be focused on the city of Boston initially. And so I would just welcome, partnership with any of your offices if you're interested in, talking more about this or possibly collaborating on it. We're hopefully going to learn a lot as we get it off the ground and figure out how we can grow and strengthen the program to ensure that, childcare doesn't have to be a barrier that holds women and single moms in particular from pursuing those types of opportunities. So I think just sort of more broadly, though, there's just a couple of things that I want to hit on about childcare in this moment. And I'm going to really focus my comments on things that I don't think other panelists are going to talk about as much, because I know there's a lot of folks who have already talked about family childcare, and I assume you're going to be hearing more about sort of what's going on in center-based care settings later on from some of the other panelists. So I want to just focus on a few things. Our coalition released a report at the end of June about how critical it is for childcare equity to be a key part of a strategy for a just recovery in our state. And, I do think, like other panelists have said, the state and federal government have such a big hand in this, and we really need big, bold action on their parts to really get out of this, and in particular, to get the resources that are really going to be needed to make the types of investment in childcare that are going to get us through. And, we have great congressional leadership taking bold stances on these issues in Congress, but just one example of how misplaced the priorities are. One single corporation, Delta Airlines, received more CARES Act funding than the entire child care system did. And, this is just, there's no way out of this unless we have a significant influx of resources from the federal government and the state. But I do think, to Councillor Edwards' comments earlier, that there are creative solutions that we can think about here in the city and figure out ways to create partnerships that will address some of the needs that we have. And so, just three things. I'm going to just talk briefly about three things. One is just to reiterate the need to both bail out and build family childcare businesses in the city as a key strategy for childcare equity and a just recovery. The second is recognizing the family, friend, and neighbor caregivers and the care labor that they are providing in this moment. And then the third is I want to hit on the what's going on in the unlicensed care sector and the importance of protecting the rights and welfare of domestic workers in this moment as well. And so, we've heard a lot from both Tanya and Janae about family childcare, but I just want to reiterate how critical I think it is, not just for the sustainability of the businesses themselves and the providers, but how important family childcare is for families in Boston. We've heard from the Department of Early Education and Care that the capacity within family childcare in the metro area is down about 2,000 seats from the pre-pandemic numbers. And I just think that family childcare providers play such an important role in our system that they're able to, they enable families to be able to find childcare that's in their neighborhood. They enable families to be able to find childcare that's in their language and their culture. And they enable families that want to work or have to work in sectors with non-traditional hours to be able to find a flexible provider that will help them make it work. And without, losing 2,000 of those seats in the Metro Boston area would be hugely damaging to families as well as the providers themselves. And so I really appreciate all of the work that the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement has done even pre-pandemic and continues to do to really focus on family childcare providers.
I'm sorry, Lindsay, in the interest of time, I need to ask you to wrap up, and then we'll come back for more questions when we get...
Sure. So I think that I'll just save my last 2 points. I have a written report that I can share, but I will just say, licensed childcare is only one sort of piece of the equation here, and what the residents of the city of Boston are, at least in this moment, mostly relying on unlicensed childcare, whether that's a family, friend, or neighbor, or a domestic care worker like a nanny or an au pair. And I'll just share some follow-up materials with some of our thoughts and recommendations about how we pay attention to the labor that those caregivers are doing as well in this moment, which is playing a critical role. And so thank you again so much for holding this conversation today, and I'll send some more follow-up materials as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm sure the councillors may have more questions as we go forward. I'd like to now introduce Anne Douglas, PhD, who's the Executive Director of the Institute of Early Education at Umass. Anne?
Great, thank you. So I'm Anne Douglas. I'm a professor of early childhood education at Umass Boston, and as was noted, the executive director of our Institute for Early Education, Leadership, and Innovation. And we do research and training focused on the early care and education workforce, leadership, and quality improvement. The mission of the Institute is to mobilize leadership from within the field of early care and education to ensure accessible and high quality programs where all young children and their families thrive. And we do this by training and supporting racially and linguistically diverse leaders from within the field who catalyze change at local and systems levels. We have a leadership and innovation network that supports the leaders who go through our programs, and we do research to produce new knowledge about early educator leadership, why it matters for quality childcare, and how to create policies and systems to support that. So our work, our leadership development work, includes a small business innovation program for childcare business owners, our signature Leading for Change course and postmaster certificate fellowship programs. We run academic degree programs in early ed at the BA, master's, and PhD levels, and we run instructional leadership institute programs. We administer in partnership with the Department of Early Education and Care, the Strong Start Professional Development Centers across the state. These are the training and technical assistance centers for childcare programs. There's 5 centers across the state, including ours here in Boston, and it provides professional leadership development and coaching for program quality improvement for providers and programs across the state. One of the most urgent areas of focus for all the educators and graduates that go through our programs and through the professional development centers is the persistent problem that has been noted over and over already in this hearing about the unstable and uneven financing for childcare programs and the inadequate and inequitable compensation for those who do this life-changing work of caring for young children and educating them. The field of early care and education was in a precarious state before the pandemic due to these factors I just mentioned, as well as uneven access to quality programs for families. And the pandemic has just exacerbated all of these issues. So as we move forward, my advice is to take advantage of this moment because it's a crisis we can't afford to waste. Many people talk about a desire to return to normal, and in the field of early care and education, we can't afford to go back to normal because normal wasn't working. It's a system that was failing early educators and providers, and it was failing families. So this really is an opportunity to reinvent a more equitable system that works for providers and families. The good news, I think, is that the field is filled with incredibly creative and innovative leaders, some of whom are speaking here today, and have many ideas and innovations about how to tackle these issues. In the next few minutes, I will share some recent research with you that offers insights about the early care and education workforce in Massachusetts. I will share some data that we've been collecting from childcare providers in Boston about the challenges they're facing. And then I'll end with some ideas, brief updates on potential policy solutions and innovations for some of these challenges. So first, I will share just a few highlights from recent research on what we know about the early care and education workforce at the state level. We've recently completed the Massachusetts Early Education and Care Workforce Survey, which was funded by the state legislature and EEC over the last couple of years. As part of this study, we ran focus groups across the state, and then we conducted a statewide representative survey of the early care and education workforce that included 3 subgroups of the workforce. It included family childcare providers, center directors, and center educators. And so this, the survey was conducted in the summer of 2019 and included questions on employment, compensation, financial status, educational attainment, professional development, and demographic characteristics of these 3 subgroups of the early care and education workforce. Because the survey was conducted in the field just months before the pandemic shut down the childcare sector, it now offers a detailed pre-pandemic snapshot of the early education workforce that we can now use as a point of comparison in understanding the impact of the pandemic on this sector. So I would like to start with some good news about what we learned in that study of the workforce, because I think it's really important to build on the strengths and to recognize the strengths when we talk about the early care and education sector and the workforce in particular. We found that the workforce actually feels valued, supported, and encouraged by their colleagues. So, for example, over 83% of educators and almost 90% of center directors said that their skills were valued and utilized at work. So that's a really positive thing. I think it speaks to why people stay in this field so long, because it is incredibly rewarding work and they often feel supported in their work context. We found that the workforce has deep experience. Over half of family childcare providers and nearly 70% of center directors have been working in the field for more than 16 years. Early educators are very interested in professional development and learning opportunities that help them improve the quality of their programs and their teaching practices, and the majority want to stay in the field. We found that the early childhood workforce feels valued and supported, as I said. They have years of experience, they want to continue to grow and advance professionally, and they want to stay in the field. But here's the bad news. The most commonly cited reason for people's desire to leave the field was low pay, lack of benefits, job stress, and the challenges of managing work-family balance. We also found significant racial disparities in employment. For example, among directors of childcare centers, which is the most highly paid work group in our study, only 5% identify as Hispanic or Latinx, 4% identify as Black or African American, and 1% identify as Asian. That's in contrast to people who teach in childcare centers and those who work as family childcare business owners and educators. Nearly half identify as Hispanic or Latinx, 22% identify as Black or African American, and 9% as Asian. Across all racial groups, our survey found that compensation for the workforce is not at all commensurate with professional qualifications or the contributions to society that quality early care and education programs bring. For example, a significant proportion of the workforce has a college degree. Over 1/3 of family childcare providers and center educators have a college degree, either an AA or a BA. 2/3 of center directors have an AA or a BA, and another 25% of them have a master's degree. Yet on average, for example, those who teach at childcare centers earn an average of $32,000. As a point of comparison, the federal poverty level for a family of 4 is about $26,000. Over half of center directors and family childcare providers and 2/3 of center educators worry about their ability to pay their monthly bills. About 40% of center educators and 1/4 of family childcare providers report they don't have enough money for food. So keep in mind, these were pre-pandemic statewide statistics. So as already been noted, things weren't great before and now they're worse. So how is the workforce doing now specifically in Boston? What are we learning from the data we're collecting through the Strong Start Professional Development Center here in Metro Boston and through our leadership development programs and networks that we run? What we found is the workforce is very focused on dealing with COVID-19 and they're struggling. We've been documenting concerns, questions, as well as the ideas and innovations that are coming out of the workforce right now. So for some examples, program owners and directors are deeply concerned about the financial viability of their businesses due to COVID-19 related guidance and restrictions. The issue of lower enrollment, the reduced group size requirements translates into reduced income that is not sufficient to cover the cost of operating a program. So this has already been noted, so I won't go into a lot of detail about it, but this results in financial stress and instability and a reported high likelihood of shutting down. So I think it's this concern that we may see a growing reduction, an increased reduction in the supply of childcare is a very real concern. Childcare providers are worried also about whether their staff will want to return to work if they haven't yet, given the increased risk to their health and no increase in pay. They're worried about getting sick, their staff getting sick, the children they care for getting sick. They're worried about what's going to happen with K-12 education because many of them have children of their own who may or may not be in school. And if their children are at home, it's unclear how they'll be able to work. So in short, uncertain plans for fall make it difficult for programs, especially out of school time programs, to plan. And all of this comes on top of the financial crisis of trying to run a childcare program in a sector that has been so persistently underfunded. So solutions. There isn't just one solution to this problem. There are many solutions, and I think it's already been noted that a massive bailout is necessary. On top of that, there are things that are more within our locus of control locally and the locus of control of providers and policymakers here. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those ideas in my remaining minute or two. So last month, our Leadership Institute held a webinar series titled Reimagining Stronger and More Equitable Systems of Early Care and Education. It drew more than 1,000 participants, and we learned about some of the innovations taking place in other states that could work here in Massachusetts. Many of these innovations are the result of technological advances that people have previously said could never be done in early care and education. But under the pressure of the pandemic, people sometimes figure things out, and turns out they can work. So for example, in Texas, the state had been talking on and off for 5 years with a developer about creating a real-time online supply and demand data system that would let parents search for childcare programs that have current openings near their homes or places of work. And it lets childcare business owners see where demand is high, so they might have guidance about marketing and their own business planning. When the pandemic shut down many childcare programs and created an emergency need in Texas to find programs that were still open, the state commissioned this real-time supply and demand system, and it was built in 1 week. Some states now license childcare microcenters. This is another way to think about an innovation. These are one-room family childcare center hybrids that are located in businesses or hospitals or schools or community-based organizations that offer space sometimes free for exchange for affordable childcare slots for employees. These and other similar models for achieving administrative scale operate with a network hub that enables them to deliver higher quality at a more sustainable cost. So this addresses some of that kind of structural problem in the childcare financing model. The network hub provides administrative and financial support. It can be operated by an organization or a worker collective or cooperative, has been one of the questions asked already. So there's different ways to think about running this kind of a hub. With no way to predict fall enrollment, microcenter networks and other ways of sharing the costs of providing childcare are a potential innovation to consider. Here in Boston, our Leadership Institute has been working with 35 small childcare businesses to test the impacts of business coaching and shared services interventions, again, to try to address the financial model and strengthen the financial model. And we've been doing that in partnership with the United Way and Tech Goes Home. Running a successful childcare program requires expertise, of course, about early childhood development, but it also requires substantial knowledge about small business operations and accounting and enrollment services, facilities, and human resources. Our initial work with small childcare business providers resulted in significant improvements in participants' business management skills and leadership. The results of that and that research were recently published in an early childhood journal. And the results were so promising that we are now running a randomized control trial of this approach in partnership with the United Way, funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, to test if this small business innovation program can strengthen the financial viability of local childcare programs and help increase the supply of childcare in Boston. And then finally, we're running an action lab now, a strategy for mobilizing change that's facilitated by the Networks of Opportunity for Child Wellbeing at Boston Medical Center's Vital Village Network. Our action lab consists of early educators, funders, policymakers, business leaders, and other stakeholders who are meeting regularly through the end of the year to find and test new ideas to improve compensation and reform financing in early care and education. If there were easy answers to these problems, we would have implemented them by now, but these challenges are not insurmountable. Some of the most creative, resilient, and talented innovators to be found in any industry are the very people you have welcomed to this hearing today, and they're the very people who work in this field. Working together, we can build a better system of care and education for very young children and families. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. I do share your optimism if we all work together. I just see a blue hand raised from President Janey. Do you have a question or a comment at this stage? Still here. Any councillors got questions? I think that was a very thorough presentation by all three of you. It's a lot of information to digest and reflect on. Any questions from my colleagues? If they're not, we can move on to the next panel in the interest of time. Panel 3 is Laurel Perel. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Eden, I just want you to know that I believe President Council Janey is, I think I saw her trying to talk. I wasn't sure if you could see her, but she's trying to say something.
Oh, there she goes. There she is.
Thank you, Councilman Mejia. I'm okay, Madam Chair. Please continue with your hearing. Many thanks to the previous panel. Thank you.
Thank
and
you
to
all.
the upcoming panel. Good to see you.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm really excited by the quality and the depth of the conversation so far. So I'm going to move on to the next panel. Laura Perel, President and CEO of Nurtury, Inc. And Myra Rosado, Program Director of Family Care, Nurtury, Inc. Laura?
Oh, man.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chair Braden, for having me, and Councillor Wu and the other sponsors, and Councillor Campbell for reaching out to Nurtury to participate in today's panel. I am joined by my colleague, Myra Rosado, also from Nurtury, who is one of our leaders in the family childcare space. And I had thought that perhaps it would not get as much attention, which is one of the reasons I asked Myra to join me. And in fact, family childcare has been a really vibrant part of today's conversation, which we think it should be, particularly during a pandemic. And Myra will speak to that a little bit later. Some of you may know me from my past 2 decades in the K-12 space. But what some may not know is that my career actually started initially in emergency need and domestic hunger relief, and then in early education and care back in the 90s. And so I can say I'm delighted to be back in the early ed space. But for those of you who have been in both, I can also say that if we thought K-12 was crazy, childcare is even more complicated than that, and more complex because of the weaker nature of the shared public commitment to public good when it comes to the education and care of our youngest children. And so I think, and you've heard about that today from a number of different speakers that we are delighted to collaborate with. I also do want to give a real shout out to the mayor's office, particularly to Tanya Del Rio, but also the leadership of Joyce Linehan and ultimately the mayor himself. In addition to what you heard today at the beginning of the pandemic, and I will point out that I started my role at Nurtury in January of 2020, and less than 2 months into what I should have called my orientation, the pandemic struck. And the mayor's office wheeled into action and helped do remarkable coordination around emergency care and supporting providers in figuring out the landscape in those early days. I also want to thank the Boston Resiliency Fund because that allowed Nurtury and other providers here in Boston to pivot to emergency care. So just briefly, Nurtury, so you have a sense of scale, Nurtury is actually a 140-year-old nonprofit here in the city of Boston that provides care to over 1,000 children and families from Chelsea, Revere, and Malden in the north, down through the city of Boston, and in nearly every neighborhood in the city, and then the edges of Milton and Dedham. We operate 6 centers, so I'll be happy to answer questions about center-based care. And we support a network through our family childcare system of 130 family childcare homes, both in and out of Boston. And as you will hear today, we believe they were always a vital part of the landscape, but they are potentially a very, very important resource in the places where we find ourselves now with COVID-19. We also work closely with the Department of Early Education and Care, and I do want to acknowledge the relatively new commissioner, Samantha Aigner-Treworgy, who was 6 months into her tenure when the pandemic struck, and her team for their responsiveness in this incredibly complex work that they are leading to first close and then reopen childcare, really navigating terrain for which there is no guidebook. That said, the state funding picture is incredibly challenging. And we are going to need more support at both the state and the federal level, especially where childcare has been and is likely to be asked to shoulder burdens, even greater burdens, that give the K-12 sector pause, as we see more and more districts opting for remote and leaving open the question of how we will support all families and children, but particularly the most marginalized, in remote, hybrid, or shifting K-12 landscapes that have a direct impact on childcare, particularly our colleagues in school-age childcare. I also want to speak to the positivity and potential in childcare and give a real shout out to my fellow Boston area directors. We banded together in the early confusing days of the pandemic and have continued to swap information, expertise, resources, sample letters to families. And so there's a very vibrant network. I think Professor Douglas's comments are important in terms of how the sector is supporting itself. Just a little data to give you a sense of the impact of the pandemic and why you're hearing all these comments about the viability and vulnerability of childcare, whether center-based or family childcare-based. So I had mentioned that Nursery was serving 1,000 families pre-pandemic. Between both the restricted capacity upon reopening in July, and I will say all of Nursery centers are reopened as of July 6th, and over 100 of our small business family childcare operators reopened in the month of July as well. But nonetheless, we are currently seeing capacity of roughly 78% of our families returning to care. About 52% are actually physically attending, and the balance have indicated their plans to return in August and early September. We are grateful that the EEC is providing coverage and payment for that. But I will point out that that means there is a 20% gap in the way our staffing is built, and childcare agencies are all about staffing. If there's a revenue cut, then we end up cutting staff. If we cut staff, we further reduce capacity. So childcare is in a very challenging cycle, and I do want to make sure that all the counselors understand the vulnerability. All of your questions about who's going to reopen and what is our capacity, keep asking them, please, because it's complex now and it will continue to be complex well through the end of 2020. As an example, Nursery is a large agency. We have scale. If we stay at about 80% capacity, since all payments are tied to your enrollment, they used to be tied to attendance, they're still tied to enrollment, which is equally challenging. Nursery, as an example, will be losing roughly $200,000 a month. We cannot sustain that for very long. And imagine even smaller agencies with proportionate losses will be even more vulnerable. So the very real concerns that were raised by a number of counselors about capacity are incredibly important. We are enormously grateful to our staff who have returned to the classrooms, but we are also very vigilant, working closely with public health, following EEC guidance. It's challenging enough to manage a room full of toddlers. Now imagine doing it wrapped in PPE. That said, the resilience is amazing. We have 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds who consistently and regularly wear their masks and play and connect with their teachers and educators. And it is a very, very adaptive field, but so much has been requested and continues to be requested of them. I will say that earlier speakers have talked about the 2 biggest challenges facing the field. I would add a third. The first is funding. The second is staff availability. And then the third, which I will always put first, is the health and safety of our staff, our children, and our families. But on the staff availability front, and this gets to my next point about the interconnectedness of the K-12 system and the early education and care system. Right now, of the 20 teachers who are out on leave at Nursery who could not return to work, 3/4 of them are out not due to health issues, but due to lack of school-age childcare. I just want to let that sink in for a moment because it is incredibly important as you think about reopening of districts, and not just Boston, Nursery works across multiple districts, that decisions made there will impact our ability to stay open for childcare and to expand our capacity to possibly support school-age families. So there has to be funding and attention to staffing in order to get there. That is an incredibly important point. The last point I want to make before turning things over to Myra, and then I will come back at the very end on some funding issues, is that childcare needs access, needs consistent and easy access to rapid tests. We are already open. All of the concerns that are currently dominating the newspaper and conversation about how to reopen K-12 safely, childcare has been open since the beginning of July. We have hundreds of children in our care already, thousands if you look at us across the city and statewide. And all of us are navigating extraordinary complexity, tests that take 1 to 2 weeks to get responses, which means you leave families, staff, and children either out of care or in a confusing place. So we need rapid turnaround on testing. And I would posit that since we are already open, getting it right in childcare will help figuring out how to get it right in K-12, but it needs urgent attention. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Myra to speak a little bit about the family childcare side.
Hello, all. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of you for giving me the opportunity to speak on here on such an important conversation and topic. I think that we can all agree to the fact that early ed is the backbone that's going to allow us to successfully reopen our economy. You know, as Laura mentioned, we have about 80% of our children return to care. What does that tell us? That tells us that parents are in need of care to return to work. It also lets us know that even during a pandemic, even though it's scary out there, parents still trust us and are still willing to bring their children to care. You know, many of them have the option to stay at home, receive unemployment or receive any government funding or take some sort of leave of absence, but they're at the point where they trust us enough where they understand that they need to go to work and they are completely capable of leaving them with childcare educators. So we definitely have built some sort of trust with our parents. They understand that we are necessary for them. And, you know, I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I am the director for FCC, so I'm going to focus my conversation a little bit more on that and what we have done as an agency to help our FCC educators. This has been nothing easy to navigate, especially for our FCC educators. Their expertise and their focus is to educate our children, to love our children, to give them the best care that they can. Their expertise is not so much all of these policies and all of this administration and everything that they have to navigate. So during this time, we made sure to help them navigate all of the new EEC policies. You know, we serve small business programs. Most of them are Spanish speaking. So when the regs started coming out, it was a little difficult for them just because most of them initially released in English. It did take EEC a little bit of time to release in Spanish. We understood that that was difficult for them to interpret all of these policies. So as an agency, we make sure to take it upon ourselves to take over that administration and make sure that they can focus on what their expertise is. So during this time, we translated documents, we translated the policies, we set up, you know, slideshows to help them understand the policies. We did daily Zoom meetings with any educator that needed it. Our coordinators were on call every single day. Even though the actual programs were closed, our agency was not closed. And the reason why I know all of this is just so that we understand the importance of the role of an agency. Before it was important, but now in this post-pandemic world, it's a lot more important than before, just because we can take on that burden of administration and we can have them focus on the early care and education that they need to focus on. That in itself is already hard enough for them to do, especially in this situation, and to have an agency back them up and make sure that they're doing everything appropriately and correctly and they're understanding everything is very important to them right now. As far as school-age education, Laura mentioned a big important point, and I want to shine a little bit of light on that because I feel that FTCs are particularly a good solution for that. The reasons behind that is that they're naturally a small group environment. They're used to working with mixed age groups. They work from birth, and some of them even up to the age of 13. Some of them are licensed to take care of school-age kids. They take them during the school year when the schools are closed. They take them during the summer. So now they're also able to take them during this pandemic time. However, when we think about school reopenings, we see that most of the school districts are most likely going to be either virtual or hybrid or something along those lines. We already have parents contacting the agency with a question, what am I going to do with my school-age child? I have to go back to work. Is the agency able to take my child during these hours so that I can go back to work? Before, we never did this. Before, the child was in care and the provider was able to work with all of them at the same time. But now these particular children are going to need a little bit more support if they are going to be in the same classroom as the other children. They are going to be taking their classes, their school classes. They are going to need those supports. We feel that we can take that on. We feel that it's a great solution to what might be coming down the pipeline. But in order for us to do that, we need a lot more support. We need a lot more infrastructure. We need curriculum support for the educators. So these are all things that we can look at creatively. This is a pivotal point for the early care education sector to be creative. We are already creative to begin with. So this is the perfect time for us to be as creative as possible for us to support our early care educators. Another point as far as an agency, we have lost seats. Yes, we have, absolutely. However, we already have an admissions department that has already been backfilling these seats. As soon as we opened, we saw where the seats were closed and we already started enrolling new children. So those educators that lost children, some of them that lost are already at capacity again. So I shine light on that to note that it might be a little bit harder for independent educators. So that when we look at this, we need to look at the scope overall, not just educators are within an agency, which get a lot more support, but educators that are independent, they don't have as much support as educators that are with an agency. Like we have all our back office that is working to help our educators. So it's very important that we look at expanding family child care. However, we need to make sure that we get the supports that we need for small business owners, for women entrepreneurs, for our families, and for our children. And that's that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair,
Go ahead.
Oh, Chair Braden, I just wanted to, if I could, make one more comment about the state funding and federal funding, which hasn't been addressed yet.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll keep it very brief. I just want to point out that this state has made an enormous commitment to the most vulnerable children in care, and I want to applaud them for that. It existed before the pandemic. This is the 55,000 children who are in subsidized care. But that is how that is going to roll out beyond September is still very, very unclear. And so I want to make sure everyone is aware that there is a question of the depth and consistency of state funding and whether or not it will allow, as I mentioned, agencies to stay fully open through the end of the year. So I want you to be aware of that. It is also absolutely critical that we get the federal relief and the $50 billion, which is the goal nationally of relief that would help Massachusetts as well. But it is absolutely important that we pay attention to the possible slippage of funding at the state level, even as much as Myra is talking about building up the infrastructure and possible city funding. I think the state funding question is so important. 80% of the cost of childcare is borne by families. And this cuts across both the non-subsidized and subsidized. And yes, the non-subsidized care is struggling even more. We believe that the state should step in here as well as the federal bailout as well, but they cannot do it by stepping away or reducing their commitment to the vulnerable children. They have to do it by expanding support for the entire sector, whether that's through economic development funds or others. These are small businesses, and these are an important avenue for women in immigrant communities and economic advancement. But we cannot take away from the one to better support the other. There has to be a look at doing both. And so I will leave on that point, and we are happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm just looking at my little red hand. So, Councillor Mejia, did you have a question or comment? I'm not sure who else. Let's see who else. I'm also cognizant of the fact that we have some people who would like to make public testimony. So if there's no particular question, we could move right along and go to public testimony. Do we have someone lined up for public testimony? Are you there? You have a question. Okay, Councillor Mejia, please go ahead.
Yes, I had a question prior, but now I'm just going to do them all in one. So I just want to say thank you to all the advocates. Laura, it's so great to see you in this position because you understand this conversation from a K through 12 and understanding if our kids are not ready and prepared when they walk into the K through 12 space, then we've already failed them, right? So it is so good to have you in this space understanding it from that lens. And so happy to work alongside you on this journey. And so I do just have a quick question for the advocates and folks who are doing this work every day. I'm just curious how the City Council could play a role in strengthening the non-standard hours pilot program. And then I'm just also very curious about how are we incorporating social and emotional trauma-informed practices into childcare services. And I'm thinking this specifically, not just because of the pandemic, but just in general, when it comes to social and emotional learning and trauma, I feel like that oftentimes gets lost in all these conversations, but now more so than ever, we have an opportunity to weave it in and make it a standard, even in the early childhood space. So just curious about who can answer any of those two questions.
I can speak to the social emotional, and I'll leave other advocates and colleagues on this panel with whom we work to address the issue of non-standard hour and care, our friends at Community Laborers United. On the social emotional component and trauma is a huge concern to us. A lot of our training during closure did focus on this. And we think of it as everyone was traumatized. Our workforce was traumatized. Our families were traumatized, and many of our children were traumatized or re-traumatized by the disruption. And so that has been front and center in our thinking about what we need to learn, what trainings and resources we need to make available. I want to point to another structural issue that I do not yet have an answer for, but historically, a lot of the additional supports that were delivered to children who need them, and Nursery, for example, has 120 of our 1,000 children are DCF-involved families, just as an example, and we have many more high-needs families as well. A lot of those services were funded externally by itinerant providers who would come into centers during the day to deliver those services to children. That is not a viable option right now. We cannot have people in and out of our centers. And so services that children need and should be entitled to and are paid for, we cannot deliver in the same way. We need to rethink that. And we need to, unfortunately, potentially look at rebuilding that capacity internally so that we can ensure, and Nursery is looking at that, but it's a big hill to climb. So that is one. And then again, just quickly on what the City Council can do, we absolutely need you to focus on the issue of testing. The city has been great, but there needs to be a bigger conversation between the state and the city about how it can be immediately, rapidly, and quickly provided to any care settings that are open. Obviously, we're focused on childcare here.
I've just been brought to my attention that Mila Montero is waiting to make testimony, and she is a parent, which were very important to hear from her. So, Mila, would you like to introduce yourself and make your comments now? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me on. My name is Mila Montero. I'm a lifelong resident of Boston. Most of my life, I immigrated from the Cape Verde Islands at a very young age. I'm a BPS graduate, and I'm a parent of 4. My oldest child is 22, so I've been doing this for a long time. Don't have a PhD, but sometimes I feel like I have a PhD in parenting. I made it through, up to college. He's almost done with college, and living at home, doing the remote thing. And my youngest child is 3, and you saw the last 2. Those are the 2 youngest that did the cameo appearance. This is a great opportunity to be able to speak about my experience as a parent and what's hard for me and what supports we need in the community. I wanted to say thank you first to first teacher. Dinah Shepherd is there. Hi, Dinah. Dinah is with First Teacher, a great community organization. If you don't know about it, you should look it up. It's an awesome program, and we are so blessed to be a part of First Teacher and to be able to be just empowered as parents. And I feel like these kind of programs are really essential during this time. I think another thing about me is I did a little stint in constituent services. So I used to actually deal with people doing these kind of things, not on Zoom, but in person. I worked for Mayor Menino for a little stint, and then I also am a current employee of Boston Public Schools. So I don't know what's going to happen in September still. I don't know if I'm going to be working remotely or if I'm going to be doing that whole hybrid thing that they're proposing. But what we need, for me, I don't even have a daycare. I haven't had a daycare since my youngest broke her leg at the age of 1 and a couple of months. She broke her leg at daycare, and I had to get investigated. I went through all that. So the daycare system has not been working, and many of you guys testified to that fact. And the daycare system does not work for people like me because it's very expensive for me to pay for licensed care. And I don't know who it was. I think she's off now. It was the woman that was speaking. I think Lindsay, was that her name? She spoke about unlicensed care. And I've had to resort to unlicensed care from relatives, paying them, a little bit, not what I would pay a licensed facility, but it was still enough money, and I couldn't claim it in my taxes because, so that's what we've been doing for years, and it doesn't work. It works for us a little bit, but my kids are not getting the school readiness skills that they need from an unlicensed auntie. They're getting a lot of love. They're eating very well, but they're not getting the, fine motor skills. I'm like, auntie, they need to draw. Well, they're going to write all over my walls, and I just got new couches. So it's really, really, really hard to be a parent that if you're not low income and you don't get any subsidies, then you don't get anything. So I've spoken to homeowners who have issues with childcare. They have to pay people who are not licensed to watch their kids because they can't get any subsidies. And they're not like people making $300,000 salaries. These are people making very, very humble salaries. So we're struggling a lot with, pre-pandemic, we were struggling with the childcare situation. The infrastructure was not working for people like me. I'm a public servant, live in Boston. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm working, so I don't depend on the system. I don't even get WIC. WIC, everybody's like, you don't get WIC. I can't even get WIC. If I want to get WIC, I have to lie to get WIC. So it's really frustrating. The system is not working. So I think that someone said that this is a great time to try to revamp the system. We really need to look at what we can do to make it more accessible to people who work, people who are working in education. This spring, it was a challenge for me. As you saw, I can't even be in a meeting for 1 hour without being interrupted. And that was not planned. That was, they're coming in here. I have to lock the door. They figured out how to unlock the door and they come in. So this pandemic during the springtime, I had to work remotely for a little while. Thank God I have the summers off. It was really hard for me to put in just 5 hours of work a day. I couldn't do it some days. I had to work early in the morning, and then I had to like do classes with my daughter, and then work in the middle of the day a little bit, and then maybe do a little bit at night. It was crazy. It was not healthy. And I can only imagine how a lot of other parents are doing the same thing. So the pay, like the subsidies that we get, though that's available, they don't benefit people like me. So I feel like we need to restructure the system that, the income criteria for subsidies so that we can also get childcare. It's unfair that I work for the city of Boston and I'm helping and empowering other parents who are trying to learn English and get their high school equivalency and helping them, but I can barely help my own family with childcare. The other thing is that I spoke to a couple of parents before coming on today about what things stress them out. Some people are very, very reluctant to go back to in-person care right now, given the situation and given the predictions that it might, the situation might worsen in the fall, and given that the fact that we don't even know what we're going to do in terms of K through 12 yet, right? My second child is not a freshman. She's a sophomore in high school now, my second child. And her school just announced yesterday that they're going to be fully remote, except for high needs learners. So because my child does not have an IEP, I'm grateful for that. And because she's not considered an ELL, she is not considered in high needs. So she's going to be remote. She is not happy about that. However, we have to come to peace. We have to do it. So that means that she's going to be home. There's a possibility I will be home. I'm not sure yet. If I'm not home, I don't know what I'm going to do with my K0. So for the first time in my parenting experience, the last 2 years ago, I got a K0 slot. I felt like I won the lottery, for real. Like it was like, wow, I won $1 million. I got a K0 slot for my 3-year-old, and I had a 1-year-old. So I said, yep, she's going to get sibling preference, and I'm going to be great. So this was the year that I was going to work out after work and then pick up the kids. I had all this planned out. I don't know how my daughter is going to do. My 3-year-old, she got a K0 slot. She got sibling preference. I did all the right things. I'm so excited, but I don't know how that's going to work. Remote, hybrid, if in person, how is she going to deal with the social distancing guidelines that they're trying to implement in BPS? So childcare for me blends what BPS is doing, both from because I work for BPS and because I have children from all ages. I have a K0 and a senior in college. So it's really, really frustrating. And I feel like we're always we're spending a lot of time on what we can't do. And we're not really thinking about what we can do, like empowering parents, providing more subsidies. Someone suggested even, the PCA system in the state. I don't know what it's called, but I know that people work as PCAs, and a lot of times their relatives can work for them and they get paid. So maybe we should have a system like that for childcare, where if I have an aunt who's retired and is able to watch my kids, and if she's incentivized and she can get like a paycheck, then, and I feel like she's clean, she's not, out there, she's completely, she's quarantined and I feel safe, then the state can help me pay her so she can watch my kids so that I can work. We need some kind of programs that can help families of all income levels, and we should start looking at families who make under $70,000 a year, because they look at you have to be like struggling in order to get any support from the system. And right now, I'm not considered struggling, so I'm on my own. And if K0 doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do. But it's really, really confusing. And the fact that the city their plan is not really solid yet. They haven't really made up their minds on what they're going to do. It's like, this is what we're going to do if the situation. It's nice to know for sure. The earlier, the better, so that we can really plan. And right now, I feel like I'm living in limbo, because I'm like, what is the city going to do? I already know. I have a child at a charter school. I'm a BPS employee, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. I have to resort to charter school education because, let's face it, our high schools, unless you get into the exam schools, not many of them are doing that great with our kids. or they don't offer the curriculum that we need. So thank God my daughter's school already made that decision. Is it a decision that I love? It's a decision that I understand. And they took feedback from their from families before making the decision. So, and I know BPS is a larger animal and they have so many more students and so many other issues, and they have less autonomy because it's a huge system. But it's nice if we can figure out what is going on with K-12, and we're sure what road we're going to travel in order for us to know what we can do for childcare. Because right now, I had someone tell me, someone who works with me told me that in the fall, if we continue to do remote, I can't have my kids like pop in and do cameo appearances while I'm in meetings, because that's not professional. I had to get a childcare provider. Someone told me that. And it's really frustrating because you can't, as a parent, you don't stop parenting. So when my kids come in and I'm in a meeting, I can't just lock them away and tell them to go. Part of their learning is like, okay, they see mom is doing a meeting, they get to wave. They were a little bit upset that you guys didn't wave back, by the way.
Mila, I'm sorry I have to interrupt. Thank you so much for bringing your your perspective. It's really important to hear from you. It's also important to hear from you work in the BPS and you've got childcare needs. It's really, really valuable perspective to bring to the conversation. I'm still have some more public testimony. I don't know if there's anyone. Thank you so much, Mila. Thank you. Are there any other folks waiting in the waiting room to make public testimony, or can we go to the recorded testimony? Just see what's happening here. I'm trying to text. Can we go to some of the pre-recorded testimony, Jordan?
I'm bringing in some of the folks who have pre-signed up to testify.
Oh.
Alejandra.
Oh yeah, is Alejandra Tejeda?
Hi, I'm actually with SEIU Local 509, and I have a provider that is supposed to be giving a testimony, but I don't see her on here. So I'll just read her testimony if that's all right.
Fine, go ahead.
Sorry, give me 1 second to pull it up. This is a provider from East Boston. Her name is Maritza Merenque. She is on the call right now. She said, my name is Maritza Merenque, a family care provider from East Boston. These are some of my reflections and concerns from our programs in the future and in current times, especially how it is in my case. Before COVID began, I had 4 private children, and when COVID hit, they were all gone. The loss of revenue has been difficult in order to support our programs and our families. When it came to reopening our programs, we were prepared with all of the rules and compliances of health and social distancing in our areas. We successfully did that, but despite all of these processes, we're seeing that our families are not coming back, and especially our families with private pay. A lot of these families are making decisions about whether their children will return or whether they feel it is safe for their children to return. And we're concerned about what will happen to these families. We're concerned what will happen to our own families, as we largely depend on the income from our private pay and our voucher families. What we hope is that we receive support and assistance to move forward so that childcare can flourish. And we ended it by saying thank you for your time, for the opportunity to speak on this issue. Liz, I think you're on mute.
I think you're on mute.
I've got it. Thank you. Who's next? Turan Dorsey, are you available?
I think Ron had to jump, Councillor Braden.
Tarsha,
submit his testimony, he said.
Tarsha Williams? Okay. Jordan, if there's no one else, or Kelly, we could go to the recorded testimony if that's possible.
There's Aisha here as well. She wants to
Aisha, okay, yes.
Aisha Kammertz.
Excellent. Go ahead, Aisha.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I was multitasking a little bit. Apologies.
That's all right. We're all doing that these days.
So thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am the Senior Manager of Community Programs at Boston Children's Hospital Office of Community Health. And I have submitted written testimony. I'm just looking through it to really make sure I highlight some of the key points. I think a lot of what I have to share is very reflective of the really incredible information that's already been shared today. Ultimately, I think we really want to reflect on the opportunity to think about how we can leverage private and public partnerships at this time and to really support the childcare system that is already very vulnerable and really needs to be built and rebuilt. And so in that, I've really focused on a few key areas of recommendation that are going to echo some of the really excellent statements already made today. So ultimately, I think one of the things we really want to make sure we support and that the city thinks about and thinks about how they partner with state and federal government and business to do is really to invest in the strengthening and supporting of the marginalized multilingual early education workforce. And I think really emphasizing the need to make sure that our support is really provided in a multilingual, multicultural way is profoundly important when we think about the equity issues that we are trying to address right now in our city, our state, and our nation. And childcare providers are such a core part of that support for families, and they're really ultimately some of the most profound unsung heroes and leaders in communities that are doing that work and addressing equity without even calling it that or saying that that's what they do. And so, for our part, the way that we have been thinking about doing that so far is we have a 10-year commitment to invest in early childcare through our Determination of Need Community Health Investment Fund, the Collaboration for Community Health, and we committed to the largest amount of funding from that bucket of money, excuse me, it's a little warm here, to be $17 million in early education and care over those 10 years. And so we already invested $5 million, and we're in the middle of the first 3-year phase of doing that. We're doing it in 3-year phases. And we have key partners in our efforts to do that right now. We have a group of 12 key partners. First Teacher is part of that work. Hi, Dinah. And we've also, as is Ann Douglas, and work that we've been doing with Shared Services and United Way. And we have a profound respect and appreciation for our partnership with Tanya. And so we just continue to try to dig in and learn from our partners to think about how we can do this work. And some of the folks that we've been excited to think about and learn from in these partnerships have been the family child care networks that we've worked with. We're funding Jamaica Plain Neighborhood Development Corporation's Family Child Care Network, and they're uniquely positioned because they also manage housing. And so thinking about that intersection between affordable housing developments and childcare, which was already raised, is something we really want to support and explore, and thinking about how there's more opportunities for cross-sector work to really raise up solutions to support childcare is one of the things we're exploring. And what's profoundly important about their network is that all of their providers are Spanish speaking, and all of the support that they wrap around their providers are bilingual and bicultural. And they additionally are able to invest in social emotional learning supports for their providers and their families, and think about economic mobility for the families that are receiving childcare. So there's a really important intersectionality there. I'd also raise up the great work that Urban College does in this space in providing multilingual education and training to childcare providers, everything from the childcare development associate's degree all the way up to affordable 4-year degrees. They're just a profound resource in our community that we should continue to raise up. Secondly, I would really recommend, and we'd like to support, that there's a focus on providing emergency and bridge resources to childcare providers at this time so that they can successfully reopen and stay open. And to that end, we are really focused on our most recent initiative that we launched, the Boston Child Care Support Initiative. And that is an initiative that provides small grants between $5,000 and $10,000 to child care providers in excuse me, you'll see I also have childcare juggling happening to the neighborhoods of Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, and East Boston, really focused on providers providing services and supports to Black and Latinx communities. And ultimately, we received over 240 applications in our first round and are fortunate and excited to say that we, in this first round, are going to fund 48 providers. We'll have another round in September and another in January. And it's very reflective of much of the work that Tanya's doing, but really supporting and thinking about how can other organizations, especially organizations from sectors that are really still focused on these needs of families, right, and communities, how can they dig in and think about supporting the community right now? And I think for us as a hospital doing that, we hope that we can model some of that cross-sector investment and opportunity. And we're really excited to see that there are other employers and folks, and the work that Ron Dorsey is leading is, I think, instrumental in demonstrating the value of that public-private partnership opportunity. And then lastly, we really want to think about connecting and supporting folks and making sure the city thinks about how we connect the care of infants and toddlers to preschool and kindergarten, and really how we can provide systemic family supports. And I think that there's an opportunity to build tremendously on the expanding efforts with Boston UPK, but we can also look at some of the really important work that's happening across the state and that is also happening here in Boston with leveraging parent partners and building up parent partners and parent leaders in communities. The Boston Family Engagement Network is a network of 8 organizations across neighborhoods throughout the city that is funded through federal funds that come from EEC. So we have these family engagement networks that are funded through EEC. Boston has the largest one, and it is led by Family Nurturing Center. We were able to give them essentially a bolster grant so that all of the parent leaders and parent support teams that wrap around families in their communities, rather than just receiving stipends and sort of a hodgepodge and mix and blend of funding, because there was never enough money to fund them full time, we were able to grant to raise up those roles and fund them full time. And the value of raising parents up into those roles and having them flexibly present in communities to outreach support families right now is imperative. It's the type of work we have to do to support families and understand what they need. And so Family Nurturing Center pivoted. They're working with all of those communities on virtual supports, but they're also able to think about getting on the phone and calling the families that they've worked with to provide supports and link them up to resources. So those are the major areas that we really wanted to reflect on. And I would just say in closing, while this is a terribly horrendous time and so hard for our communities, I would also say I think there is an opportunity to build more effective partnerships, and so that we can increase our impact as systems are redesigned, and so that we can support our families as they adapt. And we really have to act now. And I really think everyone has made that very clear, and I'm just so grateful, and I thank you all for your time and attention.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, Dinah Shepherd, are you available to make testimony?
Hi, I'm Dinah Shepherd from First Teacher. I just want to say that there's another First Teacher parent, Tolu Owatemi, who I believe signed up to do public testimony, and I see her name in the panelists.
Okay, we'll make sure we try and get her in.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you.
I don't have a comment. My comment was just that Tolu.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tarsha Williams, are you available?
Hi, yes, I am available. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I thank you very much for allowing me to testify in this panel today. I just wanted to say that, I mean, this is a very difficult time for most parents. I myself am a single mother of 3 children, but 2 school-age children in the Boston public schools. And And luckily, I mean, I work for Harvard University and I work as a union organizer. I have a little bit more flexibility, and I'm grateful and thankful for that during this time. I know that we have a lot of people in our community. I'm also from Dorchester, I should say. There are tons of people in my community who don't have flexibility when it comes to childcare. And childcare is so expensive. I really also believe that, you know, you can't talk about childcare without talking about the issues around housing, and how expensive housing is, and then trying to, you know, also juggle the responsibilities of your children is very, very difficult, especially during this time. I think that I would like to see personally more vouchers available to help struggling families. I think the middle class is not the middle class anymore, especially during COVID. We have, you know, people who were in the middle class are now, a lot of us are at, you know, almost poverty level. So thinking about having to pay the extra expenses of working full time, or and then paying childcare, or looking for a childcare facility that's available within our communities, it's devastating. So I just wanted to say that I think that this panel, it's been great to be on. I've been on all morning. It's been great to hear all the resources that are really trying to come together and really view this situation through, you know, the eyes of COVID. But there are people who are struggling. And I will just say one other thing is that we need our children in school. We really do. As we have heard, Black and Latino or Latinx kids are struggling the most throughout Massachusetts, and we've lost over 6 months of schooling. And I mean, the children are suffering. They really need that social interaction. They need to be in school. They need to be around other children safely, of course, but we really need that. So I would hope that, I hope that we're going to bring the children back this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Kelly, is there someone else waiting to make in-person testimony? I think
Tolu, if you want to unmute, you have the floor now.
Who was it? There was somebody else just let in. Is there anyone? Go ahead. Who's talking? Oh, welcome. Go ahead. Would you like to make your testimony now?
You just have to unmute.
Yeah. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Go ahead. We're waiting to hear from you. Can you unmute yourself?
Hello.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We hear you very well, loud and clear. Just go ahead. We're waiting to hear from you. No. We can hear you, so just go ahead and speak to us and let us hear what you have to say. Oh. We seem to be having some technical difficulties, Carrie, so will we go to one of the recorded testimonies? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Olive Sheehan. I'm a family childcare in Brighton. I would like to thank Councillor Breeden and Councillor Wu and their co-sponsors for giving us this opportunity to speak. When the Governor ordered all family childcare and centres to be closed on March 13th, many of us were devastated. We felt that we could have safely been given the opportunity to care for our children. Many of us lived off our savings until the PUA kept in, and had it not been for the extra federal money, we would have been in danger of not only losing our businesses, but in some cases our homes. We're not eligible for any grants as we are private pay providers and we don't take subsidies. There seems to be a myth that private pay families are very affluent, which is not the case. Many of our families are just above the income level to receive state subsidies, and without us, a lot of them won't be able to go to work, including many women across the city. We also were not eligible for any grants from the City of Boston because we do not hold commercial licenses, and some through the Boston Childcare Entrepreneur Fund and Boston Children's Hospital. We were also not eligible because we do not take subsidized care. In the event of another closure, many of us are not only in danger of losing our businesses, but our homes. I'm asking that something be done to help the private pay providers, as childcare in the city is in dire straits, and without us it would be even worse. It's almost like that we're too small to save, but in actual fact we are too big to fail. I really appreciate you having these conversations to look out for us, and thank you very much. Good day.
Thank you, Kerry. We'll just keep rolling if there's anyone else on recorded testimony.
Hi everybody, my name is Siobhan McHugh. I'm a childcare provider in Brighton for the last 23 years. Thank you, Liz Breeden, for bringing this to council. Thank you, Liz and Michelle Wu, for listening to us last week. And thank you all of City Council for listening today and hopefully taking action on our behalf. Like the majority of providers, I started my childcare as a way to provide for my own children when they were born. We are small business owners, mostly women, mostly mothers. We are single women, married women, and immigrants providing an essential service to families who live and work in the city of Boston. Sadly, we are a dying business. Childcares are rapidly closing down, especially now after the COVID pandemic. It's time to provide grants and start-up business loans to young moms and women interested in the field, and look into graduates of early education. They should consider this area too. Most in the business now are close to my age and will retire within the next 10 or 20 years, and then the business will be gone. But 20 years ago, we had huge numbers everywhere in the city. We are small businesses. We are smaller and cheaper than centres, any of them. We are more family orientated. When you hear the numbers cited on all of these surveys, especially Worcester recently, you always hear the numbers for centres. Family childcares are actually about $150 to $200 cheaper per week than most centres. We provide all food, work longer hours. We work on our own or with assistance. So your childcare is consistently the same person. Much better for your children. We are part of our communities we live in. We live, work and volunteer in these same communities. Our childcare families are actually our neighbours, which is very important. I'm a private paid childcare. I did not charge my families when we shut down in March. Instead, I opted to do emergency care for essential workers. We opened within 2 days of being closed because our regular licence was suspended, and we now had a new emergency licence. That was a terrible waste of time and money. We still don't know why EEC did that. Why suspend a licence when a couple of months later you have to go through the process to get your licence again? And now we have temporarily licences. We're not fully back yet. Emergency care was hard work. New children, new parents, multiple ages of children. Everybody was in shock, doing the best they could, And EC actually gave little or no guidelines to all of the providers doing emergency care. The PPE I was supposed to get in March, I received in June. So when BPS schools reopen, if they reopen, teachers should be considered emergency care, and they weren't. Parents who have older children and the younger children in childcare, what will they do? They're going to have one at home, one in childcare. They'll probably keep both kids out. So our numbers are going to be way down. And also there are providers who have their own children, and those children have to count in their numbers. So they'll have to turn some kids away. So due to COVID, our numbers are all way down. We're earning much less money. I have usually 4 or 5 kids during the summer when I used to have 6. I only have 3 on a Monday or Wednesday, so it's half pay at this stage. Parents are still not working full time, and actually some parents are afraid to send their kids back to childcare yet, and you can't blame them. The CARES Act is giving money to voucher providers and emergency care providers, which is great. They deserve it, and that's including me. But all providers should get money. This should be spread out. Maybe give a little bit more to emergency and vouchers, but everyone should get money. We all have the same start back costs. We all have the PPE expenses. Everyone should be getting money. The CARES Act was meant for providers. They've all lost earnings and they're all digging into their savings. So EEC is wasting a lot of money. They give webinars, a lot of them, but always in the middle of the day when actually childcare providers can't attend. I haven't attended a single one. They do weekly surveys. We in fact just got one today. This week's survey asked the wage brackets of our families. That is just strange. That is no business of EEC, and it's actually none of my business. They told us we could guess, so that was weird. So we as providers, we are very isolated. We get no help from EEC. We get no backup. The rules are constantly changing. 32 pages to start. It's up to about 52 pages now. I have never received a phone call from my licensor just to check in. So EEC itself needs to be regulated. Thank you all for listening today, and thank you all for taking action on our behalf. And hopefully this childcare business considers to be part of Boston for many, many decades to come. Thank you.
Kerry, I understand we have someone waiting to make live testimony. Cindy Geraldo, I think the name is. Cindy?
Yes, hello?
Go ahead, Cindy. We're ready to hear from you.
Oh, sorry, start with.
Thank you for your patience. It's been a long hearing, but a very important one. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cindy Geraldo. I'm a childcare provider in Dorchester, and I've been in business providing care for low-income families for all. Integral part of our economy. Without family childcare programs, our community would suffer tremendously, thus impacting the livelihood of many families. When it comes to taking care of children, that is top priority. And we all know we are entrusted with young lives, so we should be treated with respect, not talked down to, not looked down on, and treated like we're asking for a handout instead of getting what we deserve.
Cindy, your voice is breaking up a little bit. Maybe, yeah. Thank you. Try.
COVID-19 has placed a strain on our health, our finances, and our way of life. At this point, I would like to speak about the bureaucracy that is taking place with our federal funding. As you may or may not know, millions of dollars that was supposed to be issued out as a stipend that EC has now placed unconditional parameters on how much or what date we should receive the funding. The question is, why are they withholding the monies from childcare providers that deserve and need it to care for the children and to purchase the needed PPE supplies and products? It seems as the days go by, more reasons surface to cut the initial funding. This clearly shows childcare providers how valuable they are not. As the saying goes, action speaks louder than words. We need action. We need our voices to be heard. We need you because the future of childcare depends on it. At this point, many high-quality childcare programs would remain closed or eventually close. Do we need to suspend our service to our community, to our children, so our voices could be heard? It shouldn't have to come to that. Instead, let us work together to support early educators and help us receive the funding that was intended for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Thank you. I'm looking at my list, and I suspect is Tulu Otawami Awatemi still with us? Tulu, I think we're having some difficulty earlier. Are you with us still? Is Jose Daniel Rivera with us? Does anyone else want to make public testimony? Okay. Okay. Just I'm going to move on to closing comments. Would my my co-sponsors like to make some comments? I'm going to wrap this up very shortly. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Braden, again for the partnership. And I know this was a long hearing, so I want to thank all the panelists for being patient as well, and all folks who participated in the public testimony. We have a lot of solutions and ideas to work with to do our part in helping ease the pain with respect to this crisis, while also advocating, of course, for the federal government to really set aside the monies necessary to help bail out this industry, which is critically important to our children's welfare, to the community, and to our economic recovery, and also advocating for the state. One thing I will add is I was disappointed that no one from the EEC was here, because many of our constituent cases have to do with some of the new regulations and some of the frustrations with the EEC at the state level. So looking forward to also continuing to engage them on this critical issue. They play a vital role. But again, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Councillor Braden. I know this was a long hearing. Appreciate you and your leadership, and looking forward to next steps and action steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Is Councillor Wu? I don't know if she's still here. I think Councillor Wu may have stepped out. Is there any other councillors who'd like to make a comment? I think we're wrapped there. I think we're almost everyone else is left at this point in time. So I really feel this has been an incredibly useful and important conversation to have. I want to thank all of the panelists for their incredible contribution to the conversation. This is a follow-on from a previous conversation that some of my predecessors and some of our councillors who are still on the council had raised a few years ago, but I think the issues are still here. If anything, they're even more serious and more acute than they were a few years ago. I think if we all work together, we can come up with some creative, innovative, and workable solutions. So I look forward to working with you all going forward and keeping this issue on the front burner. It's very important. Thank you all so much. With that said, thank you all for your participation. Thank you for your patience, and have a good day. I now declare that this hearing is adjourned. Thank you.